In a world pushed to its very end, one final word echoed through the chaos: pandemonium. Humanity's greatest heroes, those who had transcended their limits, stood against a colossal dragon, but it was not enough. From the shadows, a gathering of demon gods emerged, their dark powers threatening to consume the entire planet. 6 of these terrifying beings were summoned, each one a nightmare brought to life, their presence signaling the end of all hope. An unstoppable wave of destruction swept across the land, wiping out cities in an instant. These were the waves of the perishing sea, an apocalypse of water that drowned everything and everyone on Earth. And standing before this overwhelming cataclysm was a lone man, bloody and beaten, humanity's last survivor. This was Seahun, humanity's last blacksmith. Gazing at the end of the world, all he could do was curse his powerlessness. With his last ounce of strength, he clutched his chest, preparing for one final, desperate act. A system window appeared. He was activating a skill, not on an enemy, but on himself, extracting the very bond that formed his soul. A crystal of pure energy materialized in his hands, pulsing with brilliant light. It was the essence of his existence. He stared at the bond, the culmination of his life as a creator, knowing this was his only chance. Without hesitation, he brought his hammer down upon the crystal, beginning his final creation. He poured all his remaining will into the frantic hammering, trying to forge a miracle that could turn the tide. In that moment, a memory surfaced, a sound he had always tried to recreate while crafting weapons, a mental image he could never quite grasp. As the world-ending wave crashed around him, he finally understood. The sound wasn't from a hammer, it was the roar of the perishing sea itself. He cursed himself for not realizing it sooner. The source of his power and the source of the world's destruction were one and the same. A bitter smile crossed his lips as he accepted his failure and the coming end. With this final tragic understanding, the reflection of the giant wave filled his eyes. His final creation was complete, a small, simple dagger. He looked at it, a tool utterly useless against the apocalypse. With nothing left to do, he let go of the dagger, his last masterpiece. The waves consumed him, pulling his body down into the dark, silent abyss. As he sank deeper, his consciousness began to fade, his journey seemingly over. But in his final moments, his eyes opened, a brilliant light glowing within them as he stared at his last creation. The dagger, a symbol of his ultimate failure and newfound epiphany, spiraled down into the darkness, triggering something deep within his soul. Suddenly, the system reacted to his realization. Countless notifications flooded his dying consciousness, all confirming that the imagery of armament had finally manifested. And from that torrent of information, one message stood out, forged from his failure and final understanding. A new skill was born. Return to origin. Seahun sits, the last survivor of a long and bitter war. Humanity had finally achieved victory over the 6 great demon gods who sought to destroy the world. But it was a hollow victory. One by one, the last remnants of civilization were swallowed by the sea. The world was ending. As Seahun watched it all unfold, he could only let out a bitter curse. A massive wave, taller than any skyscraper, loomed over the horizon, ready to erase what little was left. And in this desolate landscape, the so-called surviving heroes were nothing more than a bitter memory for Seahun. He looked back on them with nothing but contempt. A man with purple hair and a fiery temper lay defeated. A woman with silver hair, her face partially covered by a metal jaw, could only scoff at their fate. And another man, clutching his head in despair, couldn't face their reality. Seahun remembered them clearly, the so-called greatest heroes of mankind. He recalled their arrogance and fury, their selfish cries echoing in his memory. They were known as the 3 dogs, humanity's strongest hunters. The first was Yom-seong-ha, the mad dog, whose rage burned like an inferno. The second was Louise Valent, the explosive dog, a cold and calculating warrior. And the third was Amir Singh, the ice dog, whose skills were as sharp and cold as ice. Together, they had fought countless battles against impossible odds. But Seahun couldn't help but wonder if they had acted sooner, if they hadn't been so selfish. Would things have turned out differently? It was a question that haunted him, a regret reflected in his tired eyes. But now, only he remained, surrounded by the ghosts of his former comrades. Yom-seong-ha kneeled, clutching a fatal wound in his stomach. Louise Valent and Amir Singh were in no better condition, their bodies broken and bleeding out. With his eyes closed, Seahun, the last blacksmith, simply waited for the end as the world crumbled around him. One by one, they all fell, until only Seahun was left sitting on that lonely bridge. He looked upon their bodies with cold, empty eyes, calling them selfish fools who only cared about their own skins. He mocked them even in death, demanding they return the precious equipment he'd made for them. What good was it now? If they had just worked together from the start, maybe things could have been different. If he himself had been a better blacksmith, maybe he could have changed their fate. But regrets were useless now. Seihun gripped his hammer, his resolve hardening. He had one last task to perform. Surrounded by the bodies of the fallen heroes, Seihun began his final act. He wasn't going to take the bond of some dead hero. No, this time was different. This time, he would forge something using his own life as the material. As the perishing sea rushed towards him, Seihun stood his ground. He reached into his own chest, preparing to use his unique skill, Extract Bond. Magic flared around his hand as he pulled. From his own soul, he extracted a crystal, a bondstone pulsing with energy. It was the culmination of his 31 years of life, filled with nothing but regret. With his life force now in his hand, Seihun prepared to forge his final creation. The system identified it as a colorless ore, a bond extracted from Lee, our boy himself, but it was empty, devoid of any special properties. He didn't care. He placed the ore on his anvil and began to hammer it with all his remaining strength. Even as the world-ending wave crashed down upon him, he didn't stop. Strike after strike, he poured every last bit of his existence into this one final act. Sparks flew with each impact, forging his regret into a physical form. He looked at the simple dagger he had created, a bitter smile on his face. Even at the very end, there was no special ability, nothing to show for his life's work. He held the dagger aloft, a final, plain creation in a dying world. He had resolved to end his life with a weapon of his own making. But as the water consumed him and his consciousness began to fade, something strange happened. In the silent depths, a sound echoed in his mind. The sound of the waves. It was the very sound that had haunted him for 31 years, the mental image he'd been searching for his entire life. Sinking into the abyss, our boy finally understood. The pinnacle of crafting, the source of all creation he had desperately sought, was the sound of destruction itself. With this final epiphany, his life came to an end. But in his last moment, his eye caught the reflection of the dagger he'd forged from his own regret. And suddenly, a system message appeared. The imagery of armament had manifested. The simple dagger, once devoid of any power, now glowed with a new, mysterious light. An imagery skill, returned to origin, was activating. Suddenly, a voice boomed, startling him. It was an instructor, yelling at him for zoning out. Seihun gasped, his eyes flying open. Where was he? This wasn't the bottom of the ocean. He was in a forge, surrounded by the sounds of hammering. It was a place he knew well. Babel, the academy where his journey began. He heard the system message again in his mind. The imagery of armament has manifested. He looked around, completely bewildered. He was so lost in thought that he didn't even notice the instructor approaching him. The instructor snapped at him, furious that he was slacking off during the entrance exam. This was his last warning. Seihun looked at his own reflection, then down at his hands. They were young, unscarred. He had returned. He picked up the hammer, the familiar weight, a comfort in his grasp. Everything felt real. It wasn't a dream. He was back, 31 years in the past, with all the knowledge and regrets of his previous life. A wide grin spread across his face. This time, things would be different. This time, he would save them all. In the heat of the forge, Lee Seihun works with intense focus, his hammer striking the anvil with rhythmic precision. To everyone else, his work is flawless. But his rhythmic hammering suddenly stops, catching the attention of the exam's proctor, Professor Kim In-cheol. The professor's eyes narrow, sensing that something is not right with the young blacksmith. He stands with his arms crossed, watching intently as Seihun pauses over his creation, a thoughtful expression on his face. Our boy slowly runs his hand along the blade, not with the pride of a craftsman, but with cold disappointment. He lifts the sword, a weapon that would guarantee him a perfect score, and stares at it with complete disgust. In his eyes, this blade is nothing more than trash. Watching this, a new character, Assistant Han, looks on with a confused and nervous expression. He can't understand why Seihun seems so dissatisfied. Professor Kim continues to observe, his gaze sharp and analytical. He recognizes the quality of the work, but also senses Seihun's inner conflict. Without warning, Seihun lifts his hammer high and brings it down not on the anvil, but on the finished sword itself. The act sends a shockwave through the room. Assistant Han is speechless, while Professor Kim looks on, stunned by the sudden turn of events. But a faint smile plays on Seihun's lips. This is no act of madness. It's a declaration. He calmly stands before them, holding his hammer, his expression making it clear he has no regrets. He tells them the sword he made was trash. Seihun then boldly asks for permission to retake the test, right here and now. Professor Kim is taken aback. Restarting the exam with so little time left is unheard of. Assistant Han explodes in anger, shouting that Seahun is making a mockery of the Academy's prestigious entrance exam. The three of them are now in a tense standoff in the middle of the forge. Professor Kim silences the assistant with a sharp glare, telling him to stop making a scene. Han can barely contain his outrage, screaming that Seahun's arrogance is insulting to all the other blacksmiths present. Ignoring the commotion, Seahun calmly addresses the professor directly, repeating his request to be allowed to show his true skills. With a decisive strike, Professor Kim shatters a nearby workbench, his voice booming as he tells Han to bring new materials for Seahun. Our boy's expression turns deadly serious. He knows that with his current body's weak stamina and low mana, he can't afford a single mistake. The professor watches, intrigued. He had sensed a pure, powerful resonance from Seahun's hammering, a skill far beyond that of a mere student. He decides to give him a chance. To save time, Seahun decides to use a forbidden technique from his past life. He grabs 5 ignition stones and pours his mana into them simultaneously. His eyes gleam with concentration. He's about to unleash the 5-color fire demon technique, a dangerous method that could cause the entire furnace to explode. The resulting flames of different colors erupt from the furnace, shocking Seahun's rival candidate who is working nearby. The sheer power is unlike anything he's ever seen. Seahun stands before the furnace, now empty, as another student watches him with contempt. With a confident gesture, he tosses the ignition stones into the fire, activating his dangerous technique. The other students begin to murmur amongst themselves, wondering what on earth he's trying to do. They can feel the unstable mana radiating from the furnace. Suddenly, the furnace explodes with a rainbow of violent, multicolored flames engulfing Seahun in their light. The other students cry out in panic, shielding their eyes from the intense light and heat, fearing the furnace will explode. Assistant Han instinctively reaches for a fire extinguisher, but Professor Kim stops him, his eyes fixed on the spectacle. He tells everyone to stay back and observe. Han is confused, asking the professor what he means. It's clear to him that the furnace is out of control. But Seahun stands calmly amidst the swirling, chaotic flames, completely unharmed and in perfect control. He smiles. He is using minimal mana to create maximum heat, a technique far beyond anyone's comprehension. This is the power of resonance. He pulls the glowing ingot from the multicolored flames, his confidence unwavering. He's not just taking an exam, he's showing them what a true master can do. The other students can only watch in disbelief, as Seahun begins to work, the strange, colored flames still roaring behind him. The ingot glows with a rainbow hue as he pulls it from the fire, ready to be forged. Professor Kim's expression is serious. He understands now. Seahun isn't losing control. He's demonstrating a level of mastery that is simply unheard of. He thinks to himself that Seahun's use of resonance to control the flames is a work of genius. With incredible speed, our boy begins to hammer the glowing metal, each strike precise and powerful. He works relentlessly, shaping the rainbow-colored ingot with a speed and skill that defies his weak physical body. As he works, the clock is ticking down. With only 10 minutes left, his body is already starting to scream in protest. A confident smile remains on his face, but this is a battle against time and his own physical limits. He quenches the blade in the chaotic flames one last time, preparing for the final shaping. His mana is nearly depleted, and the protective barrier that shields a blacksmith from the forge's heat begins to flicker and die. The intense heat sears his hand, and blood begins to drip from his glove, but he doesn't stop. He grits his teeth, pushing through the searing pain. His expression is one of pure, unyielding determination. His grip on the hammer tightens, his hand now soaked in blood. The physical toll is immense, but his will is stronger. He knows he can't waste a single second. This isn't just an exam anymore. It's a fight to reclaim his pride as the world's greatest blacksmith. Ignoring the blood and the pain, he raises his hammer for the final series of strikes, pouring every last ounce of his strength and spirit into the blade. With a final, resounding strike, he finishes the blade just as the last grains of sand fall in the hourglass. Exhausted but triumphant, our boy hangs his head, sweat pouring down his face. He has pushed his body to its absolute limit. He raises the newly forged blade, examining his work with a critical eye. This time, there is no disappointment, only the quiet satisfaction of a true master. His bloodied hand trembles from the exertion. He has poured everything he has into this single creation. A system window appears, announcing the completion of the 5-color fire blade. He has not only passed the exam, but created a masterpiece. The blade is a high-grade weapon of mid-high quality, a curved sword engraved with 5 flames that react to the wielder's mana, a testament to the blacksmith's potential. The other examinees are left speechless, their jaws hanging open in disbelief at what they've just witnessed. Assistant Han, who had been so critical before, can only stutter in amazement, admitting that anyone can see our boy past. Professor Kim watches silently, his expression unreadable. Han is completely flabbergasted, unable to comprehend how Seahun managed to create such a weapon under those conditions. Later, Seahun is called to Professor Kim's office. The atmosphere is tense. The professor sits across from him, his expression grim, a half-smoked cigarette in his hand. Seahun sits calmly, his gaze steady, waiting for the professor to speak. The professor stands, looking out the window. He gets straight to the point, advising Seahun to withdraw his application and go to Vulcan Academy instead. He explains with a heavy sigh that Babel Academy's blacksmithing department is failing, a shadow of its former self. He tells Seahun that it would be a waste of his immense talent to stay at a dying institution like Babel. The professor reveals that in the 8 years he's been there, he has never seen a single student from their department succeed. He urges Seahun to leave for his own good. Seahun listens silently. He already knows all of this. In his past life, he witnessed Babel's slow decline firsthand. He remembers the future where Vulcan Academy becomes the world's best institution for blacksmiths, while Babel is forced to shut down its once prestigious department. But Seahun looks the professor in the eye and corrects him. He declares that Vulcan won't be the best. Babel will, simply because it's the place he has chosen. In the office, Kim In-cheol gives some serious advice to our boy. He tells him to forget about Babel Academy. With his arms crossed, Kim In-cheol insists that there is no future for Seahun at this academy. But Seahun simply states that it doesn't matter, because he's going to make Babel the best academy there is. The esteemed Babel Academy is broadly divided into 3 main departments for its cadets. There's the combat department, Agar Kuf, the support department, and the technology department, Borsippa. The combat department is famous for producing powerful knights and warriors, the frontline fighters of their world, while the support department focuses on cadets who use magic and other abilities to aid their allies from the backlines. Kim In-cheol continues, explaining that our boy, who chose the technology department, will only be treated as a disposable tool. He leans in, his expression serious, asking our boy if he still refuses to leave after hearing all this. His intense gaze reveals his past struggles, trying to warn the young student of the hardships that await him in the corrupt department. But a confident smirk plays on our boy's lips. He understands the professor's concern perfectly. Holding up his bandaged hand, Seahun declares that's why he needs the professor's help to fix the department. Kim In-cheol is taken aback by this bold declaration, a slight smile forming on his face. He looks down at his own scarred hand, contemplating the student's surprising proposal. Impressed by his conviction, Kim In-cheol agrees to the proposition and extends his hand for a handshake. Seahun firmly grasps his hand, sealing their new partnership. With a grin, Seahun says he's looking forward to it as a blue light begins to glow around them. From their handshake, Seahun's unique skill activates, drawing out a special material from the bond they just formed. A piece of rare ore materializes and floats gently into his hand. It's a high-grade material called flame-bearing iron, a metal with wood-like properties that can store fire. Back in his room, Seahun examines the iron, pulling up his status window. He's clearly thinking about his next move. The flame-bearing iron glows with a faint blue aura, ready to be used. Seahun's expression is serious. Even with this rare material, he knows the road ahead is difficult. He reflects that to achieve his goals, he can't be picky about the methods he uses from now on. Looking at his status screen, he's reminded of his current reality. His stats are pitifully low, but this is the starting point for his new journey. He lets out a deep sigh. Having a weak body after possessing so much power in his past life is a heavy price to pay for his regression. But his eyes gleam with determination. He remembers the real enemies he has to face. The pandemonium, terrifying monsters that threaten the very existence of the planet. And worse, he knows the truth that the destruction of humanity was a calculated event, orchestrated by the 6 great demon gods. Seahun ponders his situation. To fight them, he needs to secure armaments that can safeguard his memories of the future. Suddenly, his eyes widen slightly as he feels a shift in his power. A system notification appears, confirming that his bond level has officially reached level 1. 1 week later, at the academy, it's time for the additional exam to determine the freshman valedictorian. Seahun arrives just 10 minutes before the exam starts, looking surprisingly relaxed as he strolls down the hallway. He enters the refining room, where 2 professors are already waiting for him. One of the men, Vice Dean Michael Barmett, comments on his late arrival, clearly annoyed. Professor Kim defends our boy, stating that he's still on time, but the tension in the room is obvious. Our boy scratches his head, feeling the friction between the professors and the administration firsthand. His relaxed demeanor vanishes, replaced by a sharp gaze. He mutters that this is exactly why the department is in its current state. Michael scoffs, retorting that it's not about the time, but about our boy's poor attitude. He clicks his tongue in disapproval, clearly looking down on the new student. Our boy can only laugh internally at the Vice Dean's petty behavior. This is unbelievable. Just then, The door opens and another person walks in, their confident stride silencing the room. Everyone turns their attention to the entrance, waiting to see who the final examiner is. As the figure comes into full view, even the normally composed Professor Kim seems surprised. But it's Seahun who is utterly speechless. His eyes are wide with shock. The person who just arrived is Ryu Unha, the Dean of Borsippa, a powerful and commanding figure who shouldn't be here at all according to his memories of the future. Seihun's mind goes completely blank. Why the heck is she here? Lee Seihun stared in disbelief. He couldn't believe who was sitting at the judge's table. The Dean of Babel Academy, the S-rank hero known as the Weapon Eater, Ryu Unha. In his past life, she was his most loyal customer. A memory surfaced, a fragment from that erased future. A vision of Ryu Unha, her power blazing as she faced her end. In that timeline, their relationship was one of maker and user, a bond of trust that lasted until the very end. The scene flashes back to a ruined city soaked in rain. A wounded Ryu Unha sits slumped against a wall, her life fading. Even in her final moments, she wore a faint, bitter smile, filled with regret. She whispered that she shouldn't have eaten his weapon. Back then, Seihun had appeared before her, just as helpless to change her fate. He could only watch, his heart aching with the promise he couldn't keep to create an armament even she couldn't break. But this time, things would be different. He wouldn't let that future come to pass. Back in the present, Seihun's focus sharpened. He was here to change not just his own destiny, but hers as well. He stepped into the exam hall for the final test. Inside, his rival, Hans Barmut, was already waiting. A man with a stern expression and an air of authority stepped forward to explain the rules. The speaker was Michael Barmut, the vice dean of the academy, and more importantly, Hans's father. Seihun immediately sensed that the exam was rigged. Michael announced that the final test would be on alchemy smithing, a technique that used mana resonance. This was the Barmut family's specialty, designed to give his son an overwhelming advantage. Michael gestured to a wide array of ores, explaining that the candidates must choose their materials and craft an item to pair with the swords they'd already made. The time limit was only 90 minutes a time frame that favored the Barmut's high-speed modern alchemy. Ryu Unha and the other judges watched intently, unaware of the vice dean's scheme. Michael Barmut then gave the signal to begin, his voice booming with false impartiality. Hans smirked confidently, seeing this as his guaranteed victory, while Seihun quietly accepted the challenge, his mind already formulating a counterplan. Seihun calmly tied on his blacksmith's apron, his movements steady and purposeful. He wasn't the least bit intimidated. He approached the materials, his eyes scanning over them. While Hans chose stable water attribute ores, Seihun had something much riskier in mind. His gaze landed on the crimson firestone, a notoriously volatile material that everyone else was avoiding. A crazy idea began to form. While Hans began his meticulous, by-the-book process, our boy stood ready, his expression unreadable. He was about to do something no one expected. Michael praised his son's choice of materials, declaring it a safe and wise decision, completely oblivious to what Seihun was about to attempt. Hans, full of arrogance, even turned to Seihun, condescendingly offering some advice to the commoner he thought was beneath him. Seihun could barely contain his irritation at the blatant favoritism shown by the vice dean towards his son Hans. He shot a smirk back at Hans, finding the whole rigged situation utterly ridiculous. Hans simply scoffed, completely assured of his victory and looking down on his competitor. In the eyes of the academy, Hans Barmut was the star, the genius from a noble family, while Seihun was just a no-name commoner in his shadow. As expected, Hans reached for the safest, most stable materials available, the water attribute ores. He picked up a piece of lazurite, confident that its high mana content and stability would guarantee him first place. The judges watched from their seats, their expressions serious as the final exam began in earnest. Michael Barmut glanced at his son's station, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Another judge murmured that Hans's choice was flawless, just as you'd expect from the esteemed Barmut family. Michael crossed his arms, satisfied. His son was performing perfectly, just as he had planned. A sinister smile crept across his face. The stage was set for his son's glorious victory. Hans began his work, skillfully activating the runes for alchemy smithing and surrounding the lazurite with his mana. He expertly controlled the flow of energy, the process unfolding smoothly and quickly, a testament to his training. But then, one of the judge's eyes shot wide open, his attention suddenly drawn elsewhere. He, along with the others, turned to look at Seihun's station. Something completely unexpected was happening. Even Ryu Unha leaned forward, her usual calm expression replaced by one of surprise. Instead of choosing one set of materials, Seihun had picked two: hydrate, a water attribute ore, and a handful of the volatile crimson firestones. A judge gasped in disbelief, questioning if Seihun had lost his mind. Using a high-level firestone with his low mana was suicide. It was sure to cause a mana explosion. While Hans continued to carefully work on his single stone, Seahun stood before a massive pile of the dangerous firestones, preparing to use them all. The crimson firestones began to resonate, glowing with an unstable, explosive energy that made the entire room tense. But this was all part of Seahun's plan. He activated his unique skill, Bond Imprint. Using a bond stone called Harmony, he equipped the flame-bearing iron he had acquired from Professor Kim, channeling its properties into his own body. He clenched his fist, and the immense fiery energy that should have overwhelmed him was brought under his complete control. With his right arm now engulfed in roaring flames, Seahun smiled. This was the power his regression had granted him. Hans looked over, his smug confidence shattering instantly as he saw the impossible display of power. He couldn't believe his eyes. With absolute control, Seahun began the synthesis, simultaneously manipulating the opposing elements of fire and water. He grinned. A rigged exam like this was nothing more than a stage for him to show off his true abilities. From the judges' table, the difference was night and day. Hans's station glowed with a calm, steady blue light, while Seahun's erupted in a storm of fiery orange energy. One of the judges stared, dumbfounded. He couldn't comprehend how a student could possibly control such a volatile mana resonance without it exploding. The raw power Seahun unleashed was immense, a swirling vortex of fire that dwarfed Hans's careful efforts. His hands moved with blinding speed, shaping and refining the chaotic energy with the ease of a master craftsman. While Hans was still in the middle of his synthesis, Seahun finished the entire process in a single brilliant flash. The shockwave of his completed work washed over the judges, leaving them stunned by the sheer speed and power of his craft. And there it was. In less than 30 minutes, a perfectly crafted armament materialized at his station. The system announced the completion of his work. Seahun held up the finished product as the flames on his arm died down. The entire room was silent. The judges stared in utter disbelief, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. He had created a rare-grade fire-accumulating sheath, an item that not only stored mana, but also granted the powerful skill Wildfire. This was beyond the level of any student. Hans flinched, his focus completely broken. He couldn't believe Seahun had finished already, and with such a high-quality result. Panic set in. Desperate not to lose, he tried to rush the rest of his synthesis, pushing his mana too hard and too fast. The delicate balance of energy shattered. The mana around his ores began to crackle and spark violently, spinning out of control. Michael Barmett shot up from his seat, his face pale with terror. He screamed at his son to stop, knowing a mana berserk was imminent. But it was too late. Engulfed by the chaotic energy, Hans could only watch in horror as his own power turned against him. A massive explosion erupted from his station, shaking the entire exam hall and ending the Barmut family's perfect plan in a spectacular failure. At the Babel Academy's refining department, the afternoon exams come to a close. The air is thick with tension as everyone awaits the results. Suddenly, a wave of energy ripples through the hall, leaving glowing fragments in its wake. Someone has achieved a breakthrough. A blonde student, Hans Barmut, looks over with a hardened expression. He's one of the top students, but the commotion isn't from his station. One of the professors, Kim In-cheol, sighs, already sensing the argument that's about to erupt among the faculty. Hans clenches his fist, annoyed. He can't believe that a no-name student could possibly outshine him. He mutters in frustration, accusing the student of cheating. To him, it's the only logical explanation. Later that day, in the department head's office, Hans formally lodges his complaint, demanding an investigation. Kim In-cheol listens to the accusation, his back turned. He seems unimpressed by the student's tantrum. Hans insists that it's impossible for a freshman to create a rare-grade item so quickly without some kind of fraud. His voice is full of arrogance. He strides confidently into the conference room, expecting the other professors to share his outrage. He points directly at the student in question, Lee Seahun, who has been called in to explain himself. Our boy stands calmly, unfazed by the accusation. He knows his methods are simply far beyond their understanding. Internally, he scoffs at their ignorance. He reminisces about his past life, where he was a master craftsman who created legendary weapons. Hans continues his tirade, explaining that activating mana within a material, a process called resonance, requires immense time and effort that Seahun clearly didn't expend. Seahun simply listens, a faint smirk on his face. He knows explaining the advanced principles of alchemy smithing to these traditionalists would be a waste of breath. He watches as Hans presents his supposed evidence, laying out the common-sense rules of smithing that Seahun supposedly broke. Hans smiles smugly, believing he's cornered the young upstart with logic and tradition. But Seahun is just shocked at how primitive their understanding of the craft is. He can't believe these are the supposed experts of the field. Hans crosses his arms, satisfied that he has proven his point, and exposed Seahun as a cheater. Just as the other professors begin to murmur in agreement, the door opens. A woman with striking red hair walks in, her presence immediately silencing the room. It's the dean, Ryu Unha. Ignoring the arguments, she walks straight to the table and picks up the item Seahun created, a beautifully crafted fire-accumulating sheath. She holds the sheath, her eyes intensely focused. As a master herself, she can instantly recognize the revolutionary techniques used in its creation. A single tear, or perhaps drool, escapes her. She's completely captivated by the sheer genius of the craftsmanship, a level of quality she thought was only theoretical. Her professional demeanor shatters, replaced by pure, unadulterated excitement. She points a finger at the stunned professors and makes a bold declaration that silences everyone. Hans stares in disbelief, unable to process the dean's reaction. Meanwhile, Kim In-cheol looks on, a strange thought crossing his mind as he witnesses her obsessive fascination with the weapon. The uproar from the professors is immediate and chaotic. They can't believe the dean is taking the side of a potential cheater. After the meeting, Seahun walks through the academy halls. He's not bothered by the accusations. In fact, he's amused by their short-sightedness. His thoughts drift back to the past, remembering the name Barmit. It wasn't just some arrogant student, it was a name tied to a great tragedy. His strange, confident smile unnerves some of the other students, who quickly hurry past him, whispering about the odd expression on his face. He closes his eyes, focusing. The memory is hazy, but he knows it's important. He needs to remember why that name carries so much weight. The scene shifts to a memory from his past life. He recalls a hero, Louise Valent, known as the Explosive Dog, who was left crippled by a faulty weapon. The weapon had exploded, leaving her with mana burns that ended her career and left her in despair. It was a huge loss for humanity. And now, Seahun finally remembers. The one who sold her that cheap, defective weapon was none other than Hans Barmut. As he walks through the city at sunset, everything clicks into place. This is his chance to change the future and prevent that tragedy. A determined grin spreads across his face. He won't just prove his own skills. He'll make sure Barmut never gets the chance to ruin anyone's life. With newfound purpose, he looks out at the city, ready to tackle the first of many rehabilitations he needs to perform to save the future. Meanwhile, back at the academy, the department heads are holding an emergency meeting to discuss the dean's shocking declaration. One of the professors expresses his disbelief, saying they can't possibly make a student of unknown origin the valedictorian. Hans, sitting beside him, looks defeated. At the head of the table, Dean Ryu Unha sits with a cold, unwavering expression. She lets them voice their complaints, already prepared for their opposition. The professor tries to argue, pointing out that Seahun's work is technically incomplete, but the dean cuts him off. The room is filled with murmurs of protest. None of the professors can accept this sudden change, which goes against all tradition and hierarchy. Kim In-cheol speaks up, trying to reason with her. He acknowledges the sheath's quality, but questions if it's enough to risk the department's reputation. Another professor adjusts his glasses, poring over Seahun's file. He points out that Seahun's academic record is average at best, making the dean's decision seem even more reckless. The dean rises from her seat, her gaze sweeping across the room. She calmly states that their problem is they're too blinded by paperwork and status to recognize true talent. She tells them that they haven't truly seen the sheath's value. To her, it represents a paradigm shift in their entire field. Then, she delivers her final ultimatum. If Lee Se-hoon fails to prove his worth during the valedictorian demonstration, she will resign from her position as dean. The entire room falls into a stunned silence. 54 years ago, the Tower of Heroes appeared to grant humanity strength. But with that light came a shadow. The Swamp of Pandemonium, a spreading corruption that threatened to consume the world. In this chaos, Babel Academy was founded to train heroes strong enough to fight back. At the Academy's entrance ceremony, a charismatic old man, Ludwig Schubert, also known as the Ascension Emperor, addresses the new students. He encourages them to become the world's protectors. But watching from the crowd is Lee Se-hoon, who knows this old man is not as benevolent as he seems. Se-hoon grips his sword, his mind filled with memories of the future he's returned to prevent. He knows the true battles are far more complicated than what's taught here. The ceremony begins, and the top students from each department are called to the stage. Among them are Jake Myers, a blonde-haired prodigy, and the elegant Inoue Erika. Se-hoon watches them with a heavy heart, remembering that in his past life, these talented students both met tragic ends. He clenches his fist. His mission is not just about his own success, but about changing their fates to ensure humanity's survival. An announcer's voice booms across the arena, introducing the combat department's valedictorian. The first demonstration is about to begin. The opponent is revealed, an automaton Model 9, a combat golem with power equal to a C-rank hero. Se-hoon observes with a slight smile. He already knows how this fight will end. Jake Myers, the combat valedictorian, steps forward. He cracks his neck, a smug look on his face, ready to show off. Seahun and Erica watch from the side. While Jake is from a renowned family of swordsmen, he's known as an oddball for preferring hand-to-hand combat. The announcer signals the start of the demonstration. Let the fight begin. The automaton immediately lunges at Jake, its movements swift and precise. But Jake is faster, effortlessly weaving through the golem's barrage of attacks. He moves like a blur, the automaton strikes hitting nothing but air as he easily dodges each blow. With a confident smirk, Jake sees his opening. The time for defense is over. He closes the distance in an instant, shifting to the offensive. With a powerful shout, Jake throws a punch aimed directly at the automaton's core. The impact is immense, shattering the golem's armor plating with a single decisive strike. The students in the audience gasp, shocked by the sheer power Jake just displayed. Seihun's expression turns serious. He recognizes Jake as a true prodigy, a talent that only appears once a decade. The automaton is sent flying, completely destroyed by the force of the blow, and the crowd erupts in cheers for the victor. But Seihun isn't celebrating. A single thought dominates his mind. A prodigy like him only made it to A rank before he died. The weight of the future presses down on him once more. With his eyes glowing, Jake unleashes one final, powerful attack. He pivots, spinning through the debris of the automaton he just dismantled. The golem's power core spins through the air, completely severed from its body. The match is over. Jake wipes the sweat from his brow, laughing triumphantly. He's clearly satisfied with his performance. The audience is stunned into silence for a moment before erupting into a frenzy of cheers. He waves to the crowd, soaking in the applause. But not everyone is impressed. Seihun clicks his tongue in disappointment. To him, this display of talent is just a reminder of a future that was tragically cut short. The announcer's voice calls for the next valedictorian, Inoue Erica, from the support department. Seihun turns to look at her. His expression grows even more somber. If Jake's future was a tragedy, hers was a catastrophe. Erica steps forward, her presence calm and elegant, completely unfazed by Jake's explosive performance. Seihun's mind flashes back to the grim future. He sees an image of Erica, corrupted and transformed into a demonic majin, a being of immense destructive power. Back in the present, Erica walks past him, her expression unreadable. She, an S-rank hero, was eventually executed by her own family to stop her rampage. A bead of sweat runs down Seihun's face. He has to change this future. He has to save them. As Erica walks to the center of the arena, carrying a mysterious birdcage, Seihun runs a hand through his hair, the pressure mounting. A new opponent is brought out for her. It's another automaton Model 9, but this one is heavily armored, with defenses 1.5 times stronger than the previous one. Erica remains unfazed. She calmly presents the birdcage, revealing a black crow inside with a single piercing blue eye that glows with an eerie light. Her own eye begins to glow, mirroring the crow's. This is no ordinary familiar. It's a myth-grade armament. With a simple command, go, she opens the cage, and the crow takes flight. Seihun's eyes widen slightly. Even with his enhanced vision, he can barely follow its movements. He knows what's coming. The crow soars high into the sky, positioning itself directly above the heavily armored golem. The automaton immediately raises its massive shield, its sensors blaring as it detects an immense energy signature from above. Seihun watches intently. He knows that a simple defensive posture will be useless against her power. The crow's eye glows with blinding intensity as it gathers an incredible amount of energy. It transforms into a being of pure energy and shadow, diving toward the automaton like a meteor. In a single blinding flash, the crow pierces through the automaton and its reinforced shield, obliterating it instantly. A gaping hole is left in the automaton's chest, energy crackling around the edges. The demonstration is over in an instant. The crow, its blue flames extinguished, gently returns to Erica's hand. She stands perfectly composed, as if she exerted no effort at all. The crowd absolutely loses its mind, chanting her name. The sheer overwhelming power has left them electrified. Seihun lets out a nervous laugh. After 2 monstrously powerful displays, he realizes a simple demonstration of his blacksmithing skills won't be enough to gain the influence he needs. Just then, the announcer calls his name. It's his turn. Gripping his sword, Lee Seihun walks towards the stage, ready to show the world the true power of a regressor. At the Babel Academy's midterm evaluation, Ludwig Schubert, one of the supervisors, sits with his eyes closed, seemingly in deep thought as the event gets underway. Ludwig announces that it's time for the technology department's valedictorian to present, noting that this student's performance will determine the department's reputation for the year. Beside him, Dean Ryu Eunha watches with a stern and professional gaze, her expression unreadable as the evaluation continues. The crowd of students erupts in cheers. This evaluation is the most anticipated event of the semester, where the top prodigies showcase their overwhelming skills. Finally, the valedictorian of the technology department, our boy, steps into the arena. He carries a simple katana, yet his presence feels heavy and commands attention. As Seahun stands his ground, a system window reveals the details of his equipment: an advanced grade 5-color fire blade and a rare grade fire accumulating sheath. For a freshman to craft such high-level gear is unheard of. Seeing the gear's stats, the other students are in complete disbelief. A rare grade item from the refining department was something none of them expected. However, not everyone is impressed. One student smirks from the stands, while in the background, Seahun nonchalantly states that the demonstration probably won't be anything grand. This student seems to believe that no matter how good the equipment is, it's useless if the user himself is weak. Listening from her seat, Ryu Eunha's eyes narrow slightly. She watches Seahun intently, trying to figure out what his true intentions are. The announcer approaches Seahun, his voice echoing through the auditorium as he confirms the technology department's turn. But Seahun glances back, ready to interrupt. With a calm voice, Seahun makes a shocking request, asking for a different opponent than the one usually provided for his department. The announcer is taken aback, stammering as he tries to comprehend the sudden change of plans. This was not part of the script. His shock turns to horror as he processes the request. Seahun wants to face a combat automaton rated for B-rank heroes, and he wants it equipped with full armor. It's a suicidal challenge. His opponent is revealed, a massive armored automaton designed to test the limits of even high-ranking heroes. Across from it stands a veteran combatant, ready to engage. The man, a seasoned B-rank fighter, smirks confidently. He seems to be the one piloting the machine, or perhaps serving as a benchmark for its power. The announcer stands between the freshman and the veteran, the massive tension in the arena making him sweat nervously. An unprecedented match is about to begin. Left with no other options, the announcer reluctantly raises his hand, declaring the start of the special evaluation match, though he sounds completely defeated. But Seahun isn't fazed in the slightest. He gives a confident smirk, as if everything is going exactly according to his plan. He slowly draws his blade. As the sword leaves its scabbard, a brilliant red energy begins to pour out, gathering around his hands. The fire-accumulating sheath unleashes its stored power, releasing a torrent of multicolored flames that swirl around the blade, ready to be discharged. Seahun charges forward, his blade glowing intensely as he closes the distance to the massive armored automaton in an instant. The students who were mocking him just moments ago now stare in awe, their jaws wide open at the incredible display of power. Even the elite students from other departments watch with stunned expressions, unable to believe a student from the refining department could unleash such power. Then, in one fluid motion, Seahun swings his sword, releasing all the compressed flames in a devastating, colorful arc of pure energy. With his eyes glowing, Seahun prepares to unleash his ultimate technique, focusing all of his power into this single, decisive strike. He activates the armament's special skill, Wildfire. All the compressed fire attribute mana is forced to detonate at once. His eyes gleam with golden light, a sign that his unique ability as an artisan has been fully activated. He's not just a student anymore, he's a master at work. The automaton reacts, putting up a defensive barrier, but it's clearly not prepared for the sheer scale of the attack coming its way. The resulting explosion of fiery energy is immense, completely engulfing the arena in a blinding red light. The shockwave alone is enough to send ripples through the air. The students are blown back by the force of the blast, shielding their eyes from the intense light and struggling to stay on their feet. The automaton is completely obliterated by the attack. Not a single trace of it is left behind, only the lingering energy of the wildfire skill. The entire audience, including the proctors and supervisors, is left in a state of absolute shock. No one can believe what they just witnessed. When the smoke finally clears, Seahun stands alone in the middle of the arena, completely unharmed. The silence is deafening. He mutters to himself, wondering if perhaps he overdid it just a little. A single bead of sweat rolls down his face, the only sign of the effort it took. But the true extent of the damage is revealed. A massive chasm has been carved straight through the reinforced floor of the arena, a testament to the unbelievable power of his attack. From a high angle, the destruction is even more apparent. The crack runs from one end of the stage to the other, a permanent scar left by a single freshman. The evaluation is immediately cancelled. Sometime later, Seahun waits nervously in an office, tapping his arm. He's been summoned by the dean and fully expects to be expelled for destroying the arena. Just then, Dean Ryu Eunha enters the room. Seahun jolts upright, preparing himself for the worst as she approaches. He tries to play it cool, asking if she called for him. But inside, he's bracing for a harsh scolding for the millions in damages he caused. The dean looks at him with a curious expression. Instead of anger, there's something else in her eyes, something he can't quite read. Seahun begins to apologize, assuming he's about to be reprimanded for his recklessness during the evaluation. But Ryu Eun-ha quickly stops him, assuring him that's not why she called him here, much to his surprise. Suddenly, a loud growling sound echoes through the silent room. The dean flinches, completely flustered. It was the sound of her stomach. She blushes, trying to compose herself after the embarrassing moment, clearly unused to showing such a human side. Seahun just stares, blinking in confusion. This was the last thing he expected from the cold and intimidating dean of the academy. After clearing her throat, the dean gets straight to the point. She offers to buy both his sword and its sheath from him for 10 times their market price. Seahun is left completely speechless. He came in expecting expulsion, but instead, he's walking away with a massive business deal. And at that very moment, a system notification appears. A bond has been established with the target, Ryu Eun-ha, finally activating the core of his regression ability. Ryu Eun-ha's eyes widened slightly as she felt a strange energy. She focused, realizing she was forming a bond, and she knew exactly with who. Our boy felt the connection click into place. A bead of sweat ran down his face. This was the first crucial step, and it had worked perfectly. He clasped his hands together, channeling the new connection he'd established with Ryu Eun-ha. A blue aura flared up around him. A powerful surge of energy coursed between them, finalizing the bond. For Seahun, this was a power he hadn't been able to use for a very, very long time. Through the bond, he was able to extract a unique material, gluttony iron, a supreme-grade substance that consumes other metals to create a special fluid called mineral blood. The gluttony iron materialized in his hand, a spiky red orb pulsing with energy. Seahun knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. Suddenly, Ryu Eun-ha stormed over to him, demanding to know what he was doing. Seahun looked up, startled by her sudden appearance. But before he could answer, the door slid open. Ryu Eun-ha announced the arrival of Kim and Cheol, cutting their tense conversation short. A large, imposing man with gray hair and scars on his arms entered the room. This was Kim and Cheol, the headmaster's personal guard. Seahun turned to face him. Kim and Cheol informed him that the head of the academy wanted to see him personally. With that, Seahun was dismissed, leaving a bewildered Ryu Eun-ha alone in the office. Seahun was escorted to the magnificent Marduk Mansion, the main building of the prestigious Babel Academy. He and Kim and Cheol walked in silence down the grand, ornate hallway. The sheer scale of the building spoke of the power held within its walls. Kim and Cheol warned him to be respectful, stating that the academy head was on a completely different level from anyone Seahun had ever met. Seahun just listened, unfazed. They arrived at a large, imposing set of doors. Kim and Cheol stopped, indicating that this was the head's office. Seahun gave a slight, confident smile. He knew exactly who he was about to meet. In his past life, this man was a legendary figure. As he entered, a calm voice greeted him by name, confirming his identity as Cadet Lee, our boy. Sitting behind a massive desk was Ludwig, the Ascension Emperor himself, a hero of legendary status. His eyes were closed, but his presence was immense. Seahun maintained a calm expression. He knew this meeting was a test just as much as it was an invitation. Ludwig noted Seahun's lack of nervousness, finding it impressive for a new cadet. He acknowledged that Seahun's talents were indeed extraordinary. Our boy simply stood and listened as the legendary figure continued to speak. With a faint smirk, our boy thought to himself, he was already planning how to make the most of this encounter. Getting straight to the point, Ludwig offered him 2 rewards for his outstanding performance and potential. Our boy listened intently as the academy head laid out the options for his rewards. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. The first option Ludwig presented was the Blacksmith of Bonds, a rare and powerful ability. For Seahun, this was a chance to accelerate his plans far beyond his previous life's timeline. He was also offered the Blacksmith's Key, a symbol of great authority and access within the academy. But Seahun asked for something more practical. He was given 2 supreme hero-grade items, Heavy Ink Rock, which absorbs mana, and Dream Ivory. These were exactly what he needed. Holding the rare materials in his hands, Seahun was visibly surprised. In his past life, he'd only dreamed of acquiring items like these. A wide grin spread across his face. With these, his growth would be faster than he could have ever imagined. Ludwig sat back, observing the young cadet's genuine delight. He simply asked if the items were to his liking. Seahun bowed his head slightly, confirming they were perfect. His plan was falling into place. After Seahun left, Ludwig walked through the quiet halls, lost in thought. A mysterious, shimmering presence addressed him, noting that his behavior was unusual. The unseen entity remarked that Ludwig's actions were out of character, especially his generosity towards a mere cadet. Ludwig calmly replied, explaining that he had looked into Seahun's soul, but couldn't see its depths, something he'd never experienced before. He took a long drag from his pipe, a thoughtful expression on his face. The boy was an anomaly, an existence that even the great Ascension Emperor couldn't fathom. Meanwhile, Seihun made his way out of the mansion, his new rewards safely in his possession. His next stop was the refining department building for his first class. It was time to see what his fellow students were made of. Inside, a blonde student named Hans was bragging to his friends, mocking the so-called valedictorian of their department. His friend was shocked, reminding him that the valedictorian was Lee Seihun, the one who created that incredible sword during the entrance exam. Hans just laughed it off, dismissing Seihun as a nobody from a low-born family. He claimed Seihun only got lucky. Just then, the classroom door slid open, and Seihun walked in, catching Hans mid-sentence. Seihun's eyes glowed with a cold light as he shot a menacing glare directly at Hans. The pressure in the room instantly dropped, the air grew heavy, and all the chatter stopped as our boy slowly walked toward the front. Hans felt a primal fear grip him. Our boy's gaze was like that of a predator staring down its prey, and he knew in that instant he was completely outmatched. Seihun casually found a seat, the intimidating aura vanishing as if it were never there, leaving the rest of the class in stunned silence. Hans gritted his teeth, clenching his fists under the desk. He had been utterly humiliated without a single word being spoken. Just as the tension became unbearable, Kim In-cheol entered the lecture hall, announcing that class was about to begin. He informed the students that since it was their first day, they would start with a practical test instead of introductions. He brought in a large box filled with glowing stones, catching the attention of every student in the room. This would be the material for their first test. Kim In-cheol picked one up, explaining that this was projection alloy, an extremely sensitive material that reacts to its user's mana. As he poured his mana into the alloy, it began to change, morphing into a long, featureless black sword in his hand. Seihun watched with a critical eye. He knew this material well. It created an alter ego, a weapon that reflected the user's subconscious. To a true master, its secrets were an open book. In-cheol explained that this weapon shows the true self, a concept that made the other students nervous. For Seihun, however, it was the perfect stage to show his true power. The instructor continued, stating that their creations would be exhibited for a week, and their grades would depend on the results. The students imagined all the different powerful weapons they could create, each one a reflection of their own ambitions. Hans, eager to show off, went first. He channeled his mana into the alloy, ready to impress everyone. The material flashed and formed an ornate glowing rapier. It was flashy, but to Seihun's eyes, it was a shallow and meaningless creation. Seihun scoffed internally. After watching several more mediocre attempts, he realized no one here had any real talent. The top student of the department was, without a doubt, himself. Recognizing there was no longer any point in hiding his skills, Seihun stood up. It was finally his turn. He took a piece of the projection alloy in his hand. His own determined face reflected on its surface for a brief moment. Then, an immense, fiery red energy erupted from the alloy, startling everyone in the room. This was power on a completely different level. The sheer force of his mana burst out from the classroom window, a beacon of power that signaled the birth of something extraordinary. In an exhibition hall, a student looks over his simple-looking sword, muttering to himself that the impressive weapon on display must be the work of our boy. Two other students observe the scene from the side, with one looking on in surprise while his friend smirks knowingly. Their eyes are fixed on a dazzling collection of weapons, a masterwork of sword and shield combinations that easily outshines everything else in the room. The first student looks flustered, as whispers spread through the crowd, unable to comprehend the level of skill on display. A female student, with long black hair and a stern expression named Erica, watches the commotion, her face unreadable. Beside her, a blonde-haired student leans in, his smug expression suggesting he knows more than the others. The camera zooms in on the intricate details of the centerpiece sword and shield, highlighting the incredible craftsmanship. The scene shifts to a smithing workshop, where two men are stunned by a sudden flash of intense energy from the forge. Our boy stands over his work, focused, while an instructor-like figure looks on in shock, unable to believe what he's seeing. The instructor smirks, challenging Seihun by asking if anyone wants a demonstration of his supposed skills. Without a word, Seihun begins to lay out his materials on the long workshop table, preparing to take on the challenge. He concentrates, sweat dripping from his brow as dark energy begins to swirl around his arm, gathering his mana for the task ahead. Seihun holds a hammer, inspecting the raw blades before him with a pensive expression, calculating his next move. With a surge of power, his face darkens into a silhouette, as a golden light flares in his eye. He lifts the hammer, ready to strike. He swings the hammer down with immense force, his every movement observed by the shadowy figure of his challenger. The instructor confidently presents his own creation, resting the sword on his shoulder as he looks down on Seihun. He closes his eyes and holds up a finger, beginning to lecture Seihun, pointing out what he believes are the flaws in the boy's technique. Seihun listens with a knowing smile, sweat trickling down his face as if he's amused by the incorrect assessment. Suddenly, he collapses onto the table, exhausted. A mysterious black cube of energy materializes before him, absorbing the mana in the air. The instructor watches silently, his expression unreadable as he waits to see the final result of Seihun's efforts. Our boy's eyes widen, a flash of realization striking him as he understands the flaw in his approach. A confident grin spreads across his face. He's figured it out. With newfound clarity, our boy looks up, his demeanor completely changed from exhausted to self-assured. He respectfully bows, his work complete. The workshop assistant stands there, holding the sleek black sword our boy just created. But then, in a stunning role reversal, it's Seihun who starts giving the senior assistant advice, telling him he's using too much mana and needs to focus his power on a single point. Seihun stands tall, his posture completely changed, radiating confidence after the instructor's advice. The instructor looks on from the background, still processing what just happened. A dazed, almost foolish grin is plastered on the instructor's face. He can't seem to comprehend how a freshman could have such profound insight into smithing. He turns away, nodding to himself in thought. It seems the student has just taught the master a valuable lesson. Having realized his physical limits are his biggest weakness, Seihun heads to a monorail station, planning to find a magical solution to his problem. As the train doors close, he looks out the window, his mind already set on his destination, the Department of Sorcery. Inside, Seihun reflects on his situation. He knows that while his body is weak, he can use magical buffs to bridge the gap and unlock his true potential. Just as he arrives, he runs into Erika, who is flanked by two large, imposing bodyguards. One of the bodyguards aggressively points at our boy, rudely telling him to get out of their way. Seihun simply stares back, completely unfazed by the threat. His calm indifference throws them off. The bodyguards are visibly annoyed, but Erika just stares intently at Seihun, intrigued by his lack of fear. Erika interrupts, telling her men to stop. She seems to have other plans for the interesting new student. Her bodyguard is shocked, questioning her decision, while Seihun watches the exchange with a slight smirk. The bodyguard tries to protest, but Erika puts a hand to her chest and dismisses him, saying she will guide Seihun herself. A wave of power emanates from her, sending her stunned bodyguards flying back as she asserts her authority. Now walking beside Seihun, Erika moves forward, leaving her confused followers to trail behind them. She asks him where he is heading with such a serious look on his face. Seihun explains his plan to visit the Department of Sorcery to learn about buffs, which he needs for his smithing. Erika listens thoughtfully as they walk, an idea forming in her mind. She stops and pulls a finely decorated black envelope from inside her blazer, presenting it as an example. In an impressive display, she casts a spell. Magical runes and chains of light swirl around her, infusing the envelope with a powerful barrier. She explains that this is her family's specialty, barrier arts, which can be applied to objects to change their properties, and hands the enchanted envelope to Seihun. The envelope is now laced with magical chains, a clear demonstration of the barrier's defensive power. It's an invitation, sealed with the wax crest of the noble noblesse gathering. Erika smiles confidently, challenging him to open the letter and see the power of her family's magic for himself. She adds that the barrier is so complex that even a professor would struggle to understand the formula, let alone break it. But in that instant, Erika's world shatters. Seihun's golden eyes flare, and with a simple touch, he doesn't just break the barrier, he completely dismantles the core of the spell, something she thought was impossible. Her eyes widen in utter disbelief. The complex formula, a secret of her family's lineage, was unraveled in seconds by a freshman blacksmith. Seihun simply thanks her for the helpful demonstration and casually tells her she should go eat with her followers now. He turns and walks away to register for his classes, leaving Erika frozen in place as her bodyguards watch from a distance, completely bewildered. They rush to her side, frantically asking if she's all right, having no idea what just transpired. On the ground lie the torn pieces of the invitation, the crest of the noblesse gathering ripped in half, a perfect symbol of her shattered pride. Erika can only stare blankly, her mind reeling. The Academy's top genius had just been effortlessly outclassed, and she was left questioning everything she knew about talent. At Babel Academy's Department of Sorcery, students walked through the main plaza, their shadows stretching long in the bright light. Among them were our boy and Inoue Erika. As they walked together, they became the center of attention, with whispers and rumors flying around them. Seihun couldn't help but find the situation amusing, wondering why everyone was so interested in other people's business. The two of them were heading to a special lecture in the Department of Sorcery, a class known for its difficult entrance test. Seihun glanced around, noticing the other applicants for the class were all staring at them, more interested in the rumors than the lecture itself. One student watched them from a distance, noting how Seahun didn't seem to care about the attention at all. Our boy, however, was completely unbothered. He simply had his own goal for being here. He and Erica continued on their way toward the designated test area, leaving the gossiping students behind. Suddenly, as our boy walked forward, a barrier that was completely invisible to him shattered. Two men standing nearby watched in complete shock. The assistant couldn't believe his eyes, stuttering as he tried to understand what just happened. The man in the trench coat, Professor Robert Perry, was just as stunned. Our boy had just walked straight through a high-level cloaking barrier without even noticing it was there. Later, in an office, Professor Perry listened intently as his assistant gave him a report. The assistant showed him a picture on his phone, explaining that the two students, Seahun and Erica, had passed the first test by simply walking through the test site. The photo clearly showed Seahun and Erica walking casually, completely unaware that they had just passed an incredibly difficult detection test. Professor Perry realized that Seahun must have instinctually sensed the barrier and walked through it, a feat that should be impossible. The barrier they had set up was the Disorienting Soul Labyrinth. It's a powerful cloaking spell designed to distort the senses and make anyone who enters lose their way completely. A bead of sweat ran down the professor's face. He revealed that this year's test was made 3 times harder at the request of the Inoue family, making Seihun's accomplishment even more shocking. Back at the testing ground, Professor Perry and his assistant stood before the group of students who had passed the first stage. It was time for the second test. A confident-looking student with red hair and freckles stepped forward, volunteering to go first, clearly wanting to show off. He glanced over at Erica, determined to catch her eye with his performance, while Seihun and Erica watched him impassively. Professor Perry explained the test. Dismantle the active barrier before them using only mana. A complex, glowing red web appeared on the ground. The red-haired student immediately slammed his hand down on the web, trying to break it with brute force. The spell, however, was more complex than it looked. The core of the web, a small mana spider, immediately scurried away from his touch, regenerating the web instantly. The student gritted his teeth in frustration, realizing brute force wasn't working, and that he was burning through his mana far too quickly. He desperately tried to pour mana into the web to destroy the spider, but it was too fast and kept regenerating. Finally, after wasting a huge amount of mana, he managed to crush the core. Professor Perry stopped the timer, unimpressed with the inefficient display. The student looked completely defeated, especially when he saw Erica watching him with her usual stoic expression. Professor Perry's assistant reset the test, calling for the next student. As a new spiderweb formed, it was Erica's turn. The professor announced that those who passed would move to the intermediate class, while the rest would start at the basic level. The two students who had already failed looked on in disappointment. Erica stepped forward, her expression calm and focused, as she prepared to take the test. Without any hesitation, she lightly touched the web with her finger. In an instant, the entire web shattered into pieces. She had dismantled the spell with incredible speed and precision. With a flick of her hand, she finished the test, a slight smile of satisfaction on her face. Professor Perry announced her time, an astonishing 22 seconds. He noted that while it was a new record, she could have been even faster if she used a more standard method. The professor's eyes narrowed slightly. He couldn't shake the feeling that Erica's unique method was something he had seen before. Finally, he called the last applicant, Lee Seihun. Seihun stepped forward, his expression completely neutral as always. But instead of attacking the web, he simply crouched down, placing his hand gently on the ground. He didn't move, he just watched. The other students were completely baffled by his behavior, whispering amongst themselves and wondering what he was doing. Erica watched him, her expression unreadable. Our boy's eyes glowed with focus. He wasn't just looking at a spell, he was analyzing its very structure, just like a blacksmith examines a piece of ore. In his mind, he saw the barrier not as a web, but as a material he'd encountered before, heavy ink rock. He realized that if he could understand how to dismantle this spell, he could learn how to forge the rare ore. Minutes passed. Our boy remained completely still, observing the flow of mana within the web. Professor Perry watched him, a thoughtful expression on his face. When one of the students tried to interrupt, the professor simply held up a hand, telling them to leave Seihun be. He seemed to realize that something profound was happening. After nearly 8 minutes, Seihun finally moved. He placed his hand on the web and sent a pulse of his own mana into it. A wave of fire erupted from the center, instantly incinerating the mana spider and destroying the core of the spell. As the flames died down, the entire web dissolved, leaving nothing behind. The other students stared in disbelief at what he had just done. He had used a completely different method, treating the spell itself like a piece of metal to be forged and tempered. He smiled to himself, having gained a crucial piece of knowledge he needed to craft a new item. He had essentially created a permanent counterformula for the spell. Seihun stood up and walked away as if nothing had happened, leaving everyone else standing in stunned silence. The professor's assistant looked at his stopwatch, utterly speechless. The final time was 7 minutes and 45 seconds. By the standards of the test, it was a terrible score, but what they had just witnessed was something else entirely. Professor Perry, however, wasn't looking at the time. He understood exactly what Seihun had done. He hadn't just passed the test, he'd mastered the spell on a fundamental level. While Erica had overpowered the spell with speed, Seihun had taken the time to completely analyze its structure and create a perfect countermeasure. If he ever faced the spell again, he could now dismantle it in seconds. Erica watched Seihun go, her eyes filled with a mix of awe and fear. She wondered what kind of monstrous items a blacksmith who could forge magic itself would one day create. As Seihun walked into the light, he had not only passed the test, but also revealed a glimpse of his true, terrifying potential to those who were wise enough to see it. An email arrives from the Babel Administration Department. A first-year cadet named Lee, our boy, has applied for intermediate smithing using hero-grade materials, and the department is looking for a supervisor. Inside the faculty office, a professor leans back in his chair, intrigued by the unexpected notice. A first year handling hero-grade materials? That's almost unheard of. The announcement sent a shockwave through the faculty. One after another, professors began flooding the chat, all of them applying to supervise the talented or perhaps reckless first-year cadet. This level of excitement was rare, even among the academy's elite instructors and powerful figures. The professor stared at his screen, pondering just how a mere student could cause such an uproar. But then, a new message brought all discussion to a halt. The dean herself, Ryu Eun-ha, had declared she would personally oversee Lee Seihun's smithing. And here he is, Lee Seihun, looking a bit lost as he enters the workshop. He seems completely unaware of the chaos his simple request has caused. Waiting for him is the dean, Ryu Eun-ha. With her arms crossed and a serious expression, she eyes the first-year student who managed to get her personal attention. Without wasting any time, Seihun gets to work, laying out his materials under the dean's watchful gaze. He's about to show her exactly what he's capable of. He picks up the first material, a piece of heavy ink rock, a rare and difficult ore. He places it into a pitch-black container, the first step of a process known as the Dark Curtain. He seals the container, preparing to use his mana to separate the impurities from the ore on a molecular level. Inside, a complex reaction begins, a process far beyond what any normal student could ever hope to achieve. Sehun's eyes narrow in concentration. His focus is absolute, pouring every ounce of his will into the task. Ryu Eun-ha watches in silence, her initial skepticism slowly turning into genuine surprise. After purifying the material, Seihun moves to the next step, carefully controlling the temperature and conditions. He stands before the forge, the real test about to begin. The air in the workshop grows heavy, with heat and anticipation. Then, Seihun unleashes his mana. A wave of crimson energy erupts from him as he begins to manipulate the raw flames of the forge. He filters the fire with his own power, stabilizing it and turning the wild red flames into a controlled, vibrant green. This is the technique known as flowing wildfire. With the fire perfected, he begins to hammer the glowing ore, each strike precise and filled with power. The dean can't hide her astonishment. The techniques he's using are things she's only read about in ancient texts. She's witnessing something legendary. For 4 straight hours, Seihun hammers away, his body pushed to its absolute limit, sustained only by sheer willpower. Night falls outside the academy, but inside the forge, the work continues without pause. Even the dean, a top-tier warrior herself, starts to feel the fatigue from just watching the grueling, non-stop process. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the hammering stops. Sehun's hand trembles, his stamina completely drained, but the forging is finally complete. Now for the final, most crucial step. Casting. He pours the molten metal into a mold. The now purified metal, black as ink, settles into its new form. But Seihun isn't done. He picks up another crucible, containing a different substance. He pours this new liquid into the mold, much to the dean's confusion. He's mixing materials at the last second. She watches, wide-eyed, as he performs another seemingly impossible feat. He's using a barrier dismantling formula to slow the cooling process. With a grin, Seihun uses this borrowed time to construct a complex mana circuit inside the liquid metal before it solidifies. The mana circuit activates, stabilizing the entire structure from within. The mold cracks open, revealing the finished product within. A system window pops up, announcing the completion of the ink spider bracelet. The system praises his skill as first rate. Our boy lets out a shaky breath, stumbling back. The immense effort has left him completely drained. There it is, the ink spider bracelet. A rare grade item that absorbs the wearer's mana to increase its weight and can even use a skill called Explosive Ring. Despite his exhaustion, a triumphant smile creeps onto Seihun's face. His plan had worked perfectly. Suddenly, the dean's stomach rumbles loudly, breaking the silence. All the intense work has made her hungry. Seihun glances over as she blushes, completely flustered and embarrassed by the unexpected interruption. He closes his eyes for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his face as an idea comes to mind. Looking at the simple, elegant bracelets, the dean realizes they seem unassuming. But she knows the process to create them was anything but. Seihun, meanwhile, is already gathering the leftover materials. He presents the finished ink spider bracelets to her, 4 of them in total. Then, he slides over the bucket of leftover scraps from the forging process, offering them to her as a palate cleanser. The dean eyes the bucket suspiciously. She picks up a piece of the blackened rock-like substance, wondering if he's serious. She hesitantly puts it in her mouth, her expression unreadable. She's shocked. It's not just edible, it's delicious, with a crunchy texture and savory flavor like fried crumbs. Seihun watches her reaction, knowing full well the unique properties of his smithing byproducts. He smiles, asking if she's interested in his previously crafted 5-color fire blade and its sheath. He cheekily suggests that he might just give them to her for free. The dean eagerly starts munching on the scraps, her earlier dignity forgotten in the face of the surprisingly tasty snack. She admits that after tasting this, she's even more interested in his other work. She tells him to name his price for the sword and sheath, clearly impressed by everything she's witnessed. Seihun shakes his head. He's not selling it. Not yet, anyway. He explains with a confident smile that hunger is the best spice. He plans to wait until the upcoming subjugation class, when everyone is desperate for better gear, to sell his masterpiece for the highest possible price. The dean closes her eyes, savoring the last of the scraps. She understands his strategy. It's a calculated, clever move. Having finished her snack, she agrees to his plan. She's clearly dealing with someone who thinks several steps ahead. But just as their conversation ends, our boy's vision begins to blur. The hours of intense labor have finally caught up to him. His body has reached its breaking point. He collapses, his consciousness fading. Ryu Eunha acts instantly, catching him before he hits the floor. Seihun, barely conscious, gives her a weak, apologetic smile. Even as he's fainting, he seems to be thinking of the trouble he's causing. Ryu Eunha looks down at the unconscious student in her arms, a complicated expression on her face. The situation has become far more involved than she ever expected. Looking at his exhausted face, she seems to come to a decision. With a sigh, she effortlessly lifts him up, bridal style. The Dean of Babel Academy is now personally carrying an unconscious first-year student. Without any warning, she leaps into the air, a fiery aura surrounding her, as she flies out of the workshop window with Seihun in her arms, heading towards the dorms. As she flies, she reflects on how much things have changed since he arrived. This regressor was turning the entire academy on its head. Meanwhile, down by the school fountain, a mysterious black-haired girl watches the streak of fire fly across the night sky, wondering what it could be. She holds an invitation in her hand, clearly waiting for someone. It seems Lee Se-hoon has another visitor he knows nothing about. On the Babel Academy's online forum, a post suddenly grabs everyone's attention. It's a picture of Inoue Erika, the top freshman from the UR department, standing alone in front of the refining department building for 3 hours straight, sparking a wave of confusion. The comment section explodes with theories. Some students guess she's waiting for the valedictorian from the combat department, but others quickly shut that idea down, adding to the mystery. In his classroom, Lee Se-hoon scrolls through the very same post on his phone. The 2 students in front of him notice and begin whispering nervously among themselves. Suddenly, the classroom door slides open, revealing a mountain of a man with a red bandana. He announces that he'll be their substitute professor for the day. Before anyone can react, he slams the door shut behind him, the loud bang echoing through the silent room and making all the students jump in their seats. The students are completely terrified by his aggressive entrance, letting out a collective scream of shock. But our boy remains unfazed. He simply looks up from his desk, his expression hardening as he sizes up the intimidating new professor. With a single command, Professor Ricaros Miles orders the entire class to start running to the training center. Seihun struggles to keep up, his breath already ragged. He pushes himself forward, sprinting across the vast academy grounds, determined not to fall behind despite his body screaming at him. Professor Ricaros waits for them at the training center, a stern look on his face as the students begin to gather. He addresses the exhausted students, his voice booming. He declares that in this era, a blacksmith who can't fight is nothing more than prey. He's referring to the notorious Flame Blade Hunters, a group that specifically targets and attacks blacksmiths who can forge powerful fire attribute weapons. Lee Se-hoon listens intently, clenching his fist. He understands the professor's words better than anyone. Survival is paramount. The other students, however, are completely stunned. The harsh reality of their profession is something they had never considered. As Seahun finally collapses from exhaustion, the professor tells him that if he can't even handle this, he should just quit. But Seahun isn't just weak. He's been training under extreme conditions. A bracelet on his wrist begins to vibrate, revealing the secret to his fatigue. This isn't an ordinary accessory. It's a training tool he crafted from heavy ink rock, which absorbs his mana to drastically increase its own weight. It also grants him the gravity-manipulating skill, Explosive Ring. A look at his stats confirms his current physical limitations. His strength, durability, and agility are all E rank, barely above average. Panting and sweating, Seahun struggles to stay upright. Professor Rikaros watches him, seemingly unimpressed by his lack of stamina. But lying on the ground, Seahun just smirks. He knows that his current weakness is just a temporary phase in his grand plan to become overwhelmingly strong. To test him further, Professor Rikaros tosses a practice sword at Seahun, telling him to show him his swing. With a challenging look, the professor holds out his own sword, ready to gauge the student's true potential beyond his physical stats. The two of them face off in the sandy arena. Despite his exhaustion, Seahun picks up the sword and assumes a ready stance. As the professor swings down, Seahun meets the blow perfectly. The impact sends a shockwave through the sand, his flawless form absorbing the force with pure technique. Watching from the sidelines, the other students smirk, completely misjudging the situation. To them, Seahun is just a weakling getting taught a lesson. But Professor Rikaros isn't angry. He's smiling. He sees something in Seahun's stance that goes far beyond what a normal student should be capable of. Seahun presses his advantage, his blade moving with a speed and precision that completely betrays his exhausted body. The professor's eyes widen in shock. He realizes Seahun's sword isn't just moving randomly. It's following a perfect, calculated path with every single swing. In his mind, he visualizes the flawless trajectory of their exchange, a level of mastery he has never seen in a student before. In the next instant, the spar is over. Seahun's blade is resting gently against the professor's throat. Victory was decided in a single perfect counterattack. Seahun stands victorious, while the professor is left completely stunned. Professor Rikaros admits that Seahun's sword path is perfect, but he's baffled. He asks who on earth could have taught him such a technique. Seahun just smiles sheepishly, giving a vague answer about learning from an old master who was an expert blacksmith. He's thinking of his master from his past life, the very same man who taught him everything he knows about both forging and fighting. Realizing the explanation would be far too complicated, he just scratches his head, leaving the professor utterly confused. Impressed, Professor Rikaros decides Seahun's talent is wasted on him and hands him a recommendation letter, telling him to go to the Akar Kuf department to learn proper body control. Following the instructions, Seahun arrives at the Grand Akar Kuf building, a place known for training the academy's elite. He walks in to find a chaotic scene. A grizzled-looking man is kicking a blonde student on the ground. This man is Ma Guangsu, the infamous sword breaker. Ma Guangsu shouts at the student, telling him to get lost and stop bothering him. It's clear he has zero interest in taking on a disciple. He then notices Seahun standing quietly in the doorway, and his annoyed expression shifts to one of curiosity. Seahun walks forward, recommendation letter in hand, as the blonde student, Jake Myers, continues to beg Ma Guangsu to train him. He hands the letter over. As Ma Guangsu reads it, Jake whispers, recognizing Seahun as a student from the refining department and dismissing him as a nobody. Seahun waits patiently, ignoring the arrogant whispers from the boy on the floor. He has a feeling he knows this irritable master. Suddenly, an idea seems to strike Ma Guangsu. He points directly at the unassuming Seahun. Tired of being pestered, he turns to Jake and gestures towards Seahun, proposing a test to get rid of him once and for all. He declares that if Jake can defeat the new arrival in a one-hit wins match, he'll consider taking him on as a student. Seahun simply gives a slight nod of acceptance. He calmly picks up a wooden practice sword, ready to face the academy's top combat prospect. Ma Guangsu watches with a detached expression, simply using Seahun as a tool to get the annoying blonde kid off his back. Jake Myers gets to his feet, a confident smirk on his face. He prepares his attack, seeing this as an easy win against a mere blacksmith. Ma Guangsu grumbles to himself, clearly fed up with the whole situation and just wanting to get back to his drink. Jake rushes forward, aiming to end the fight instantly. Seeing Seahun's relaxed stance, he assumes it's an opening and goes for a grapple. He gets Seahun in a lock, confident that his superior physical strength will secure his victory against the physically weak blacksmith. But Seahun isn't panicking. He grits his teeth, a flicker of a smirk on his face. This is exactly what he was waiting for. With his opponent now within a 1-meter radius, Seahun's trap is sprung. A faint circle of light appears on the floor around them. He clenches his fist, activating the hidden skill in his bracelet. The heavy ink rock flashes with a brilliant blue light. It's time to end this. In an instant, an overwhelming force slams down on Jake, crushing him into the floorboards with the force of a meteor. Seihun lets out a grunt, the recoil from his own skill sending him tumbling to the ground as well. But while Seihun is just catching his breath, Jake is completely immobilized, pinned down by the intense, localized gravity. The match is over. The combat department's top prodigy lies defeated, face down on the floor, knocked out in a single move. Lying on his back, Seihun looks up with a satisfied smile. His technical skill and clever preparation were just a little bit faster than raw talent. Inside the training hall, a stern-looking professor watches as Rikaros checks on Lee Sehun's ankle after their intense duel. But Seihun's response catches the professor completely off guard, making him question what he just heard. Seihun looks up with a smirk, explaining that he merely copied a technique he saw Rikaros use before, implying the original was flawed. The comment leaves Rikaros speechless, muttering about how pathetic his own skills must be, while the professor looks on with a grim expression. Instead of getting angry, Rikaros' demeanor completely changes as he realizes the value of what Seihun just taught him. His face lights up with gratitude and excitement. He sees this as a chance to finally get into the professor's class. He quickly turns and gives a deep, respectful bow to the professor, formally requesting to be admitted. Seihun watches the scene unfold, unimpressed. The professor agrees to Rikaros' request, but then turns his attention to Seihun, telling him to demonstrate the technique properly. The two now face each other in the empty dojo, swords at the ready. The professor wants to test Seihun's skills for himself. Seihun's eyes narrow as he deflects the professor's initial strike, his focus absolute. However, the force behind the professor's attack is immense, shattering Seihun's wooden training sword on impact. The professor stands firm, remarking that while Seihun's application is crude and stiff, the core concept behind the sword skill is brilliant. He realizes with a jolt of annoyance that he's the one who created the original technique Seihun just improved upon. The test is over. Having seen enough, the professor stands with his arms behind his back, acknowledging Seihun's potential. Seihun cuts straight to the point, asking if this means he's finally enrolled in the class, much to the professor's bewilderment. With the confirmation he needs, Seihun gives a formal bow, asking the professor to take care of him from now on. The professor lets out a small, satisfied sigh. It seems he's finally found a student worth his time. As Seihun leaves the training hall, Rikaros comes running after him, calling his name. He catches up, out of breath but clearly excited, eager to thank Seihun properly for getting him into the class. As a token of his gratitude, he presents Seihun with an elegant black envelope sealed with red wax. Seihun inspects the invitation, recognizing it as an invitation to Noblesse, an exclusive club for the Academy's elite. He thinks about how his connection to Rikaros is already paying off. He asks Rikaros if he's trying to bribe him, but Rikaros insists it's just a small thank you gift. With a bright, genuine smile, Rikaros says he hopes Seihun will accept it. Seihun accepts the invitation with a faint smile, already calculating how this new connection will benefit his future plans. With his new class secured and an unexpected opportunity in hand, Seihun leaves the training hall, his day a success. Later, while reviewing his class schedule at a campus cafe, Seihun is startled when someone suddenly bumps into him from behind. He turns around to find an eccentric-looking girl grabbing his wrist, her eyes fixated on the bracelet he's wearing. Her green eyes sparkle as she examines the item, recognizing it as a high-quality heavy ink rock, a rare material for enchanting. She holds his wrist tightly, completely captivated by the bracelet, while Seihun stares back, confused by her sudden appearance. Her expression shifts to one of manic glee. She sees the bracelet not just as a material, but as a perfect canvas for her skills. Seihun's ability, Blacksmith of Bonds, activates. A system window confirms that a bond has been established with the girl, whose name is Leah Claudel. Seihun instantly recognizes her name. From his past life, he knows Leah Claudel is a legendary genius who will one day revolutionize the entire enchanting industry. Leah sits down at his table, still mesmerized by the bracelet. She begins muttering to herself, calculating the insane compatibility rate of the materials. She spirals into a frenzy, pulling at her hair as she realizes the sheer potential of the item in front of her, all while Seihun calmly sips his drink, completely unfazed. Suddenly, she has a breakthrough. She declares that with her skills, she can raise the bracelet's grade by not one, but 2 entire ranks. She slams her hand on the table to emphasize her point, her passion causing the ground beneath her to crack. She then looks at Seihun with deadly seriousness, begging him to entrust the bracelet to her for enchanting. Her eyes sparkle with anticipation as she clasps her hands together, eagerly awaiting his answer like a kid promised a new toy. But before Seihun can reply, a tall, imposing figure walks up to their table, casting a shadow over them. Leia tries to shoo him away, but the man ignores her, slamming his hand down on the table and grabbing Seihun's wrist. He glares down at Seihun, his expression filled with contempt and aggression. The man, one of Erika's lackeys, stands over them menacingly and angrily asks if Seahun remembers his master. He sighs in frustration, recalling how Seahun had torn up the invitation Erika had given him earlier. Seahun listens to the accusation with a deadpan expression, showing no signs of concern. The lackey's eyes narrow in fury as he demands to know why Seahun would dare disrespect his young master. With a tired look, Seahun simply explains that Erika herself was the one who told him to tear it. His calm response only enrages the lackey further, while Leia looks on, annoyed that her enchanting discussion has been interrupted. Leia smirks, finding the situation amusing. She asks the lackey if he plans to pick a fight over something so trivial. Thinking of the powerful master he serves, the lackey's resolve hardens. He declares that at Babel, the strong prey on the weak, and he's here to prove it. With his declaration made, a powerful aura explodes from his body, shaking the ground around them as he readies his assault. Seahun looks back at him with an expression of pure boredom, completely unfazed by his threat. The lackey summons his power, launching a flurry of shadowy blades straight at Seahun. The blades transform into spectral wolves mid-air. Seahun quickly moves to shield Leia from the incoming attack. But, instead of dodging, Seahun catches the magical beasts with his bare hand, effortlessly dissipating the energy. The lackey freezes, a drop of sweat running down his face. He can't comprehend how his ultimate move was stopped so easily. A strange, metallic substance swirls around Seahun's hand. It seems his arm absorbed the energy from the attack. Seahun grins, a red aura flaring up around his fist. He mockingly asks if the lackey was talking about himself when he mentioned the weak becoming prey for the strong. His eyes glow with power. The roles of predator and prey have just been reversed. A system window reveals his ability. Gluttony Iron, a supreme-grade power derived from his bond with Ryu Unha, which devours iron to create mineral blood. The lackey lunges forward in a desperate final attack, but Seahun dodges with ease. He throws a furious punch, putting all his remaining strength into it. Seahun stops the blow effortlessly, leaving his opponent kneeling on the ground, completely defeated and out of energy. Leia watches the entire exchange with wide-eyed shock, her mind blown by the power Seahun just displayed. Having dealt with the nuisance, Seahun glances back, his expression calm as if the fight was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. His power, and the mysteries surrounding him, continue to grow deeper. After his recent trials, Lee Se-hoon stumbles through a quiet alley, clutching his side in exhaustion. Just as he thinks he's alone, he spots a figure and calls out, asking to get a closer look at the dagger she's holding. The girl, Inoue Erika, turns around. Without a word, she simply holds out her hand, gesturing for him to give her the weapon instead. Se-hoon complies, handing over his dagger for her inspection. As Erika examines the blade, her eyes widen slightly, her reflection caught on its polished surface. She seems to have noticed something unusual about it. She tests the dagger's edge while Se-hoon watches, scratching his head awkwardly, not quite understanding her sudden interest. Erika looks down at the dagger, a bead of sweat running down her face. She realizes this weapon, and its owner, are far more complex than she initially thought. Later, back in what looks like a classroom, Se-hoon sits alone, carefully arranging the daggers on his desk. Suddenly, a system window appears before him, announcing that a bond has been established with Inoue Erika. Se-hoon stares in confusion. But his confusion quickly turns into a subtle, knowing smirk. This development seems to be something he can use to his advantage. He quickly gathers the daggers, realizing he's short by 10 blades, a fact that sends a small part of him into a panic. The scene shifts to a lecture hall. While the professor speaks, Se-hoon can't help but let out a massive yawn, clearly bored by the lesson. At the front of the class is Professor Kim In-cheol, a veteran blacksmith whose stern expression and scarred body command respect. To demonstrate his point, the professor slams his hand down, and a powerful red energy flows from his scarred palm, showing his mastery over metal. He explains the concept of metal deformation, twisting and reshaping the material with his mana alone. The demonstration ends, and his hand rests calmly on the now perfectly formed iron ingots. Now it's the student's turn. An assistant hands out the materials for the practical exam. Professor Kim watches over the students, ready to assess their skills as they begin the difficult task. As he releases his aura, the other students are visibly intimidated by the sheer pressure emanating from him. The challenge begins. Se-hoon and another student, Hans Barmut, place their hands on the iron ingots, preparing to reshape them. Hans finishes the first part of the task quickly, smugly announcing that he's completed it. Se-hoon, on the other hand, remains focused and silent. Professor Kim acknowledges their work, but reminds them that the real test is restoring the metal to its original state. And that's where Hans fails. His ingot shatters, ruined beyond repair. Meanwhile, Se-hoon's ingot floats perfectly restored, a feat that leaves his rival speechless. Hans stares in disbelief, sweating as he tries to comprehend how Se-hoon managed to do what should have been impossible. Even Professor Kim is shocked. He points directly at Se-hoon's flawless work, impressed by the new student's incredible and unexpected display of skill. Hans Barmut shows off his deformed ingot, confident in his skill, unaware that his work is fundamentally flawed. He strikes a triumphant pose, beaming with pride, fully expecting to be praised for his creation. But Professor Kim's next words cut through his celebration, explaining that the true test isn't deforming the metal, but restoring it. Hearing this, Hans looks down at his hands, only to see his creation crumbling into pieces. His confident expression vanishes, replaced by utter shock. He realizes his fatal error. He pushed the metal too far, permanently ruining its internal structure. It's nothing more than scrap now. The professor calmly points out that what he created wasn't art, but a mistake born from a lack of fundamental understanding. He explains that once the mana pathways within the iron are broken, restoration is impossible for a mere cadet. All eyes then turn to Seihun, who calmly presents his own deformed ingot as Hans watches with a bitter expression. With a single motion, Seihun clenches his fist, and the complex metal structure instantly begins to collapse back into its original shape. As if by magic, mysterious black threads envelop the ingot, effortlessly guiding the metal back to its primal form. The professor stares, his jaw slack with disbelief. He just declared this impossible, yet he's watching it happen right before his eyes. Seihun opens his hand, revealing the perfectly restored ingot with a confident smile. Even as the last of the strange black energy fades, Professor Kim can't tear his eyes away, trying to process what he just saw. His expression hardens. This student's ability goes far beyond simple talent. It's something he's never encountered before. He thinks back to the ancient masters, the legendary blacksmiths who sought the ultimate understanding of their craft. They called it the truth of iron, a level of mastery far beyond the reach of modern smiths. Could this boy truly possess such knowledge? After the lecture ends, Professor Kim dismisses the other students, but tells Seihun to stay behind. As Seihun approaches the podium, the professor rewards his exceptional performance. He opens a small box, revealing a rare-grade crimson fire jade, a valuable reward for his outstanding display of skill. The professor then asks how he managed the restoration. Seihun simply gives a humble, pre-prepared excuse. He claims it was only possible because the ingots were specially adjusted for cadets, a lie to hide the true nature of his power. Professor Kim, while clearly skeptical, accepts the explanation for now and turns to leave the classroom. Once the professor is gone, Seihun allows himself a small, satisfied smile. Everything is going according to plan. But in his office, the professor's mind is racing. He knows the ingots weren't special. He understands that Seihun possesses a power that defies all logic. Unable to let it go, he returns to the lecture hall and extends an offer to Seihun, an invitation to his exclusive minor course, Armament Fundamental Studies. Seihun politely accepts the professor's offer, shaking his hand to seal the deal. But this is no ordinary handshake. As they clasp hands, Seihun secretly activates his ability, a faint blue energy crackling between their palms. A system window confirms his success. He's extracted a high-quality material called flame-bearing iron directly from the professor, thanks to their newly formed bond. That night, Seihun sits alone in his dorm room. He knows that his current body is too weak to keep up with his ambitions, and he's decided to do something drastic about it. He reflects on a fundamental rule of this world. When multiple mana attributes exist in one body, they inevitably clash, causing destruction. But for Seihun, this is a risk he has to take. He takes out the Crimson Fire Jade, its fiery energy casting a red glow on his determined face. It's time to reforge his own body. He channels his mana into the gem, preparing to absorb its immense power and make it his own. Activating his S-grade skill, Spirit Body Smithing Magic, he begins the agonizing process of reshaping his own mana circuits. A giant ethereal hammer appears above him as he treats his body like raw iron, ready to be smithed in the crimson flames of the jade. The hammer strikes. Seihun grits his teeth, enduring the searing pain as his very essence is broken down and reforged. After what feels like an eternity, a notification appears. The painful process was a success. His fire attribute has been permanently strengthened. His overall stats have skyrocketed, jumping from E rank all the way to D. He's panting and covered in sweat, but the power-up was worth the agony. As he collapses to the floor in exhaustion, a mysterious woman with orange hair and yellow glasses appears, crouching over him with a curious look. She smirks, critiquing his reckless methods but encouraging him to keep pushing his limits, hinting that she knows more about him than she lets on. Hearing her words, Seihun's gaze hardens with resolve. He will stop at nothing to achieve his goals in this new life. Standing in his quiet room, a new power flowing through him, Seihun solidifies his determination. He will use anyone and anything, friend or foe, to make sure he has no regrets this time around. At the Babel Academy, the deadline for the first semester's smithing project was fast approaching. One student confidently stated that he had already submitted his work, boasting about its high quality. Meanwhile, in the forge, other students were frantically trying to finish their projects. The sounds of hammering echoed through the workshop. But Lee Se-hoon was in a world of his own, examining a blade with intense focus. He knew that with his current weak body, this was the best he could do. He gripped his hammer, ready to put the finishing touches on his creation. He had to make this last strike count. Se-hoon carefully inspected the blade, a bead of sweat running down his face. He poured all his past life's knowledge and experience into this single sword. His expression tensed. He had pushed his body to its absolute limit for this, and the result was still just normal. Suddenly, a memory flashed through his mind, the memory of a past he was desperately trying to overcome. He stood alone, watching the world crumble around him, a feeling of helplessness washing over him. He remembered the deafening roar of the perishing sea, the sound of the world ending. This was the trauma that fueled his determination. Back in the present, his eyes snapped open, the painful memories still fresh. But then, a brilliant light erupted from the sword. He had succeeded. A system notification appeared, confirming his achievement. He had forged the white light longsword, a rare grade masterpiece created from nothing but ordinary iron, a feat that should have been impossible. As Se-hoon presented his sword, the other student's jaw dropped. The quality of Se-hoon's blade completely overshadowed his own. A small, confident smile played on Se-hoon's lips. His skills from his past life were slowly but surely returning. The other students looked on in disbelief. One was so demoralized he considered dropping out, while the other simply couldn't comprehend the difference in their skill levels. The next day, Se-hoon waited at a cafe. He had a meeting with a certain senior from the academy. Soon, a young woman with brown hair and glasses arrived. She seemed a bit overwhelmed by the crowds, remarking how many people were out and about. She led him out of the bustling city and into a quiet, rural area, walking along a rustic path. They finally arrived at their destination, a quaint, old-fashioned hardware store. As they entered, the woman greeted her grandmother, her voice echoing in the quiet shop. An older woman with sharp eyes and gray hair tied up in a bun turned to face them, her expression stern. Looking Se-hoon up and down, she bluntly asked her granddaughter if he was her boyfriend. The blunt question makes both of them flustered. Helena continues, unimpressed, wondering aloud what her granddaughter was thinking by bringing a boy to her workplace. Se-hoon and the senior stand awkwardly in the store as Helena sighs, clearly not happy about the unexpected guest. The senior tries to explain, stammering that it's not what it looks like. But Helena just stares back, her expression full of doubt. Cutting the awkward conversation short, Helena gestures them forward, telling them the workshop is this way. She hands them both frying pans? The senior explains they're for restoring magic formulas, leaving Se-hoon to wonder what kind of training this is. She then reveals her tools, an enchant palette filled with various powders made from ground magic stones. Se-hoon watches with his arms crossed, realizing what's happening. The senior is an enchanter, and this must be her unique method. She gets to work, dipping a brush into the palette like a painter, and applying the magical powders to the pan. With each stroke, the brush glows with a golden light, infusing the object with mana. A complex, glowing magic circle appears on the surface of the pan, the enchantment process well underway. Se-hoon recalls a memory from his past life. Enchanters would often join battles, hastily applying buffs to warriors' gear right on the front lines. He watches her now, noting her incredible focus. Her technique is flawless, but there's something missing, a lack of real-world experience. He can't help but smirk. Her methods are clever, but he can already see several ways to improve her work. As she works, Se-hoon takes a look around the workshop and is surprised to find a high-quality whetstone just sitting on a workbench. He leans in for a closer look. It's an artifact made of compressed mana particles, far too valuable for a simple hardware store. Helena is clearly more than she seems. Helena notices his interest and challenges him. She tells him to prove he's more than just a soft-looking student from Babel. Se-hoon nods, accepting the challenge without a word. He walks over to a set of knives and calmly picks up a standard kitchen knife. Helena watches him, a skeptical look on her face. She tells him not to blame the tools if he fails. Se-hoon simply smiles, inspecting the dull edge of the blade. He assures her he'll do his best. He places the knife on the whetstone, his expression turning serious as he prepares to work. With a deep breath, he begins to sharpen the blade, his movements precise and steady, honed by years of experience from his past life. Watching from the side, Helena's confident smirk falters. She can't believe her eyes. This is no student's technique. It's the work of a master. Suddenly, the senior lets out a panicked scream. She's made a mistake in her enchantment. She looks over at her grandmother, stunned by the look of sheer concentration on her face as she watches Se-hoon work. Just then, the door opens and a large man in a pinstripe suit walks in. The senior greets him as Professor, while Helena seems annoyed by the interruption. Helena swiftly smacks her granddaughter on the head, telling her to be quiet and show some respect. Seahun holds up the newly sharpened knife, telling Helena that while the tool was excellent, his body is still too weak to bring out its full potential. He gives a slight bow, promising to do better next time, and turns to leave. Without another word, he quickly exits the workshop. The senior, completely bewildered by the turn of events, scrambles to follow him out. Helena is left alone in the workshop, staring at the ordinary kitchen knife that now radiates an extraordinary aura. The man who just arrived, a combat professor from Babel, cheerfully asks if his knife is ready. Helena is still so shocked by what she just witnessed that she can barely respond, leaving the professor confused. Noticing the knife on the table, he picks it up, assuming it's his. But the moment he touches it, he freezes. He stares at the blade, completely stunned. The edge is perfect, balanced in a way that seems to defy logic. He asks Helena if she's the one who sharpened it, but she quietly tells him it wasn't her. His eyes widen in disbelief. He demands to know who else could have possibly created such a masterpiece. With a tired sigh, Helena reveals the truth. It was a freshman who sharpened it. The professor is left speechless, his mind racing to figure out just who this mysterious first-year student could be. Lee Seahun and Leia Claudel walk through the academy grounds. Leia seems to be asking for his opinion on something she's been working on. Seahun listens with a calm expression, but his gaze is sharp and analytical as he prepares to give his critique. He reflects on the state of the academy's refining department, remembering that in the future, it becomes the weakest of all, a fate he plans to change. Leia, excited and a little nervous, presses him for feedback. Seahun, however, is brutally honest, telling her that her methods are too narrow-minded. He smiles, explaining a complex theory about enchanting, comparing it to seeing a stone's reflection on the water's surface. Leia listens, completely captivated. Seahun stops, telling her that real enchanting isn't about applying magic to the surface, it's about embedding it within. The simple statement sends a jolt through Leia. The idea of granting reinforcement times beneath times the surface is a concept she had never even considered. Her entire worldview shatters in an instant. This one piece of advice completely changes her understanding of her own craft. To demonstrate, Seahun confidently takes a simple knife, ready to show her what he means. Leia watches intently, her expression serious. She can tell she's about to witness something revolutionary. Seahun presents the theory. Smithing creates the stone, and enchanting carves its image onto the water. He then channels his energy, causing the ordinary knife to pulse with a deep red light. Leia is stunned as she feels the power radiating from within the blade, a technique called layering. The knife now possesses an internal structure, a dreamlike enchantment that gives it incredible power. Seahun looks at his creation, a simple knife now elevated to a work of art through his advanced knowledge. He casually tosses the knife, and it lands with a powerful thud, sticking deep into the ground. A blinding flash of light erupts from the blade, showcasing the immense power contained within. Leia quietly processes what she just saw, her mind racing to comprehend the implications of his technique. Suddenly, it all clicks. An explosion of inspiration hits her, and she realizes the true depth of Seahun's genius. Overcome with excitement, she grabs Seahun, begging him to let her borrow the knife so she can study it. Seahun, slightly bewildered by her sudden outburst, agrees and hands over a full set of the enchanted knives. Leia jumps for joy, shouting that she loves him as she runs off, completely absorbed in her newfound passion and inspiration. Seahun is left standing alone, waving goodbye as he checks the system, seeing that he's successfully extracted high-quality bond materials from her. He lets out a slightly exasperated sigh. Everything had gone according to plan. With that taken care of, Seahun turns and makes his way towards the massive martial arts hall, ready for the next phase of his plan. As Seahun walks, he's joined by Inoue Erika, who quietly asks what he's planning. Her eyes are wide with a mix of curiosity and concern. From their brief time together, she knows he always has a reason for his actions. Seahun gives a sly smile, replying that he's just going to watch a ranking battle, and that she'd probably be interested too. Without another word, he proceeds, his system activating to analyze the bond materials he just received. The first is the social link stone from his bond with Erika Inoue, an artificial ore that can stabilize the mana in other minerals. And from Leia Claudel, he received a complex blast bloom, a top-quality ore that acts as a powerful amplifier. Both are exactly what he needs. Soon, they arrive at the massive arena. On the big screen, the event's commentator, a young and energetic professor named Ran Fang, hypes up the crowd. Professor Ran Fang welcomes the audience to the highly anticipated ranking battle. In the center of the arena, a lone figure stands in the spotlight. Her long blonde hair flows as she waits for her opponent. She calmly brushes her hair back, her presence commanding the attention of the entire stadium. This is Arya Myers, the Academy's rank 1, also known as the Sword Saint. She looks upon the crowd with an air of absolute confidence. Erika looks on in awe, calling her Radiant Arya, clearly a huge admirer of the Sword Saint. Seahun, however, remains unimpressed. On the opposite side of the arena, her challenger makes his entrance. Seahun recognizes him instantly. It's Yom Song-ha, also known as Mad Dog. In the past, this was the man who killed him. A fierce warrior with a crazed look in his eye, Yom Song-ha is the successor of the Flame Wheel Ember Spear style. The battle begins. Sparks fly as two immense powers get ready to clash. Yom Song-ha unleashes his spear, enveloped in a blazing aura ready to strike. Arya calmly draws her sword, her expression unchanged, as if she's simply humoring him. With a powerful downward swing, he brings his flaming spear down on her. But his attack completely misses. He stares in shock, unable to believe she dodged it so easily. Arya moves with blinding speed, leaving a trail of fire in her wake as she counters. She effortlessly parries his attack, sending him flying backwards. Seahun and Erika watch the one-sided fight unfold, though their reactions couldn't be more different. Despite his fierce reputation, Yom Song-ha is completely outmatched, his hands trembling as he struggles to hold his ground. He desperately swings his spear, trying to create some distance, but it's no use. In an instant, Arya appears behind him, the tip of her sword pointed directly at his throat. He can only stare forward, completely defeated. The match is over in a single exchange. Arya stands victorious, a serene smile on her face as the crowd roars her name. Professor Ran Fang excitedly declares her the winner, praising her overwhelming display of power. Arya gives a slight laugh, humbly accepting the praise and the adoration of her fans. Defeated, Yom Song-ha walks away, his head hung in shame. His pride has been utterly shattered. Watching from the stands, Seahun simply smirks. He can tell that Yom Song-ha is furious about his loss. Erika asks if that's all, wondering if they're leaving already. Seahun confirms, having seen all he needed to. As he walks away, he dismisses Arya's fighting style, calling it obnoxious. To him, her flashy moves are just for show. Erika is taken aback, confused by his sudden anger and his harsh criticism of the beloved Sword Saint. She can't understand why he would have such a strong, negative reaction to Arya's flawless victory. But in the arena, amidst the cheering crowd, Arya turns her head. It seems she heard him. Ignoring the thousands of adoring fans, her gaze locks onto Seahun's back as he leaves, a flicker of interest in her eyes. In a park near the martial arts hall, a student named Yom Song-ha was deep in meditation, trying to center himself. Suddenly, a figure approached. It was Lee Seahun, the protagonist, who looked at the meditating student with a calculated gaze. Seahun's mind flashed back to the future, remembering the same man, Yom Song-ha, as a legendary hero who sacrificed himself to defeat a great evil. Back in the present, Song-ha opened his eyes, sensing Seahun standing behind him. He coldly told him to leave. But Seahun didn't move. Instead, he began to speak, his words intentionally chosen to provoke the martial artist. He calmly stated that the history of Seong-ha's martial arts style would end with him, a deep insult to his master's legacy. Seahun just gave a slight, almost mocking smile, clearly pleased that he was getting a reaction. Seong-ha stood up, turning his back as he tried to dismiss the comment, but the insult had already hit its mark. Seahun continued to taunt him, his voice unwavering as he pressed all of Seong-ha's buttons. Seong-ha finally snapped, his patience completely gone. He warned Seahun to take back his words. But Seahun's expression remained shadowed and unreadable. He had no intention of backing down. Suddenly, another student appeared out of nowhere, comically trying to drag Seong-ha away, telling him to get back to making armaments. Ignoring the interruption, Seahun began to gather energy in his hand, preparing for the confrontation he had started. The two now faced each other, the tension in the air so thick you could cut it with a knife. The real test was about to begin. A memory surfaced in Seahun's mind, a vision of a past battle, reminding him of the power he was about to face. Without another word, Seong-ha charged forward, his fist crackling with energy, ready to strike. He threw a powerful punch, channeling his anger and mana into a single decisive blow. But just as the attack was about to land, Seahun calmly raised his hands, catching the punch with a strange energy-dampening technique. The impact sent a shockwave of fiery energy outward, but Seahun stood his ground, completely unfazed. Seong-ha's eyes widened in shock. He couldn't believe his attack had been stopped so easily. From Seong-ha's perspective, Seahun looked impossibly calm, standing amidst the lingering embers of the attack. With a slight smirk, Seahun brushed off the remaining energy from his fist, as if it were nothing more than dust. The two fighters locked eyes, a silent challenge passing between them as the fiery energy swirled around them. Seahun then effortlessly redirected the energy, sending a stunned Seong-ha stumbling backward from the force of his own deflected attack. But Seahun seemed completely unconcerned with his opponent. He let out a small sigh as the fiery particles dissipated around him, his objective already achieved. Yom Seong-ha got to his feet, bruised but not beaten. His eyes burned with a mixture of fury and disbelief. But Seihun simply held up the glowing ember of mana he had plucked from the attack, examining it as if it were a new toy. To him, this was just another material to collect. Enraged and humiliated, Seong-ha's aura exploded once more. He wasn't going to let this end so easily. For a moment, the image of his future self, the legendary spearman, flashed in his mind a vision of the true power he was about to unleash. He lunged forward for another attack, but this time, his punch was intercepted just inches from Seihun's face by another student. The student, Jake Myers, had jumped in at the last second, stopping the full force of the blow. Seihun watched, completely unfazed. Jake struggled to hold back the immense power, his own hands steaming from the effort as he stared down the furious martial artist. Panicked, he pleaded with Seong-ha to stop, shouting that Seihun could have died. Hearing this, Seihun looked on with a slightly bewildered expression. With Jake physically holding him back, Seong-ha finally began to calm down, the intense energy between them slowly fading. Jake quickly ushered Seihun away from the scene as Seong-ha turned and left, finally ending the tense standoff. As they walked off, Jake was still shaken, asking Seihun if his hand was okay after blocking the first attack. Left alone, Seong-ha stood in silence, reflecting on how he had lost his composure over a few simple taunts. He felt a sense of shame. Meanwhile, Seihun walked calmly as Jake followed, bowing his head in apology for the trouble they'd caused. But Seihun just had a quiet, satisfied smile on his face. Everything had gone exactly as he had planned. A system notification popped up, confirming his success. A bond with his target, Yom Seong-ha, had been established. This bond was represented by a card, showing the two sides of Seong-ha, his current self and his future, more powerful version. As they walked away from the scene, Jake couldn't help but marvel at how tough Seihun was, admitting he was genuinely impressed. He cheerfully showed off his own hand, pointing out that it was scraped up just from stopping the fight, highlighting how strong Seong-ha was. Seihun glanced down at Jake's hand, his expression turning analytical. He noted how tough his hands were, already seeing him as another potential source of materials. Jake then started complaining about his older sister, who he said had taken an annoying interest in Seihun lately, much to Seihun's surprise. He immediately clutched his head, realizing he'd said too much and that his sister would kill him if she found out he was talking about her. Seihun paused, a bit concerned. He now remembered who Jake's sister was, a powerful and influential figure in the academy, and her sudden interest in him could mean trouble. Seihun's mind drifts to Arya Myers, the Sword Saint. In this timeline, she's still the perfect hero, but he knows the dark future that awaits her. Walking beside him, Arya's brother, Jake Myers, nervously warns him that his sister has taken a special interest in him. But Seihun just smirks, completely unfazed. Jake continues, describing his sister's interest as petty and insidious, practically begging Seihun to be careful. But Seihun's thoughts turn grim. He isn't worried about her current games, he's thinking about her future transformation. His calm demeanor only makes Jake more frantic, who can't understand why Seihun isn't taking the threat of the Academy's top prodigy seriously. The scene shifts to a vision from a fallen timeline. Seihun remembers Arya Myers not as a hero, but as a warrior clad in armor, wielding a demonic sword under a blood-red sky. He recalls her returning as a servant of the demon god of extinguishing light, a being of immense destructive power. In his mind's eye, he sees her final, terrifying form, a fallen angel of destruction, ready to bring ruin to the world. Back in the present, a slight smile plays on Seihun's lips. He knows Arya is the greatest threat he'll have to face, but he already has a plan. Having gotten the information he needed, Seihun waves goodbye to the bewildered Jake and heads on his way. Just then, a notification pings on Jake's phone. His face pales as he sees who it's from. It's a message from his big sis Arya, who sweetly asks him to keep her updated on his new, interesting friend. A single bead of sweat rolls down his face. To him, this isn't a friendly request, it's a command he dare not disobey. He can almost picture her sinister smile, knowing she's using him as a pawn to get closer to Seihun. Standing alone on the street, Jake feels a chill run down his spine, caught between a terrifying sister and a friend who seems to fear nothing. The next day, in the lecture hall, Seihun looks tired of the Academy's trivial matters, while another student in the front row seems to be trying to stay out of trouble. Suddenly, the classroom doors burst open, and a tiny man in a top hat zooms in on a small, wheeled platform, making a grand entrance. This is their new professor for attribute refining, Reese Dova, an eccentric man with a large mustache and a stern expression that contrasts with his comical size. Professor Dova scans the room, and the other students shrink in their seats under his intense gaze. He holds up a paper, a pleased look on his face, as he prepares to make a very important announcement concerning one of the students. Hearing his name called, Seihun rises from his seat. The entire class turns to look at him. He reveals his new look, having lowered his bangs after relentless comments about his previous ugly hairstyle. The professor strokes his mustache, a look of admiration on his face. He's clearly impressed by the student standing before him. Seahun listens with a neutral expression as the professor begins to speak. He's confident in his abilities, so this attention isn't a surprise. He simply watches the tiny professor, waiting for him to get to the point, as the rest of the class holds its breath, wondering what announcement could be so important. Professor Dova then makes his announcement. Seahun's refining assignment was so perfect that it's being sent to a public auction for second-year students. He then introduces the class assistant, Yom Seong-ha, a top-tier third year from the prestigious Spear Arts Department, known for his incredible talent. The other students are shocked. Having a genius like Seong-ha as an assistant is unheard of, but Seahun remains completely unimpressed. Professor Dova explains that today's lesson will be about residual mana, a key component for advanced techniques, and Seong-ha is here to provide a demonstration. He explains that artifacts like these can store residual mana, but a true master doesn't need them. Instead, they can charge their own bodies with it, creating a permanent source of power. With a proud smile, the professor asks Seong-ha to demonstrate his famous Flame Wheel Ember Spear technique. Seong-ha gathers fire attribute mana into his hand, preparing to unleash his signature move. In an instant, 3 brilliant wheels of fire appear, circling around him with immense heat and power. The other students are left speechless, completely overwhelmed by the sheer power radiating from the third-year prodigy. Professor Dova clicks a button on a remote, happy to use this as a teaching moment. A screen displays the core concepts of the technique, using residual mana to create and sustain the powerful flame wheels. The professor excitedly praises Seong-ha's perfect demonstration, while the senior simply stands there, arms crossed, soaking in the admiration. The first-year students can only stare in awe, realizing the massive gap in power between them and an elite like Seong-ha. After class, students rush to flatter Seong-ha, with one eagerly reaching out to praise his amazing skills. But Seong-ha coldly dismisses them all, brushing past the student without a word. His arrogance is on full display. The rejected student walks away, head hung low in shame. A gloomy aura spreads through the classroom as the other students feel the same way, muttering about how they're just trash compared to him. Seong-ha stands there, enjoying their despair, until he notices Seahun walking towards the exit without even a glance in his direction. Seahun's complete indifference is the one thing that gets under the proud senior's skin. But to Seahun, the 3 flame wheels are nothing. He remembers Seong-ha from his past life, a hero who reached the legendary 7th wheel before falling into a catastrophic slump. As Seahun continues to walk away, Seong-ha's pride can't take it anymore. He calls out, stopping him in his tracks. Seahun slowly turns, feigning ignorance, as Seong-ha marches up to him, annoyed by the first year's lack of respect. Seong-ha gets right in his face, his expression hardening as he prepares to put the disrespectful junior in his place. The two stand off in the empty hallway. Seong-ha clenches his fists, ready for a confrontation, while Seahun calmly waits for him to make the first move. But Seahun doesn't even flinch. He calmly looks at the enraged senior, his expression unreadable. Seong-ha demands to know why he's being ignored, but Seahun simply drops a bombshell. He knows Seong-ha can no longer maintain his 7th wheel. Seong-ha freezes. His mind goes blank. How could a first-year student possibly know a secret that he hasn't even shared with his own sect leader? The arrogant prodigy is completely stunned, his pride shattering in an instant as his deepest secret is laid bare. His carefully constructed image of perfection crumbles, leaving him clenching his fist in a desperate attempt to hold himself together. Seahun, meanwhile, has him right where he wants him. Seahun then points out the exact flaw in his technique, how he's just letting power fly away haphazardly. He then makes an offer. He'll help, for a price. He lays out 2 conditions. First, Seong-ha will pay for his advice, and second, he must consult Seahun before making any difficult decisions in the future. With his terms laid out, Seahun confidently walks away, leaving the desperate senior with an impossible choice. Cornered and terrified of permanent failure, Seong-ha's arrogance is replaced by pure desperation. He knows he has no other option but to agree. Seahun looks back with a triumphant smirk. His plan was a success. He's just secured his first high-level subordinate, bringing him one step closer to his goal. In the academy's smithing workshop, 2 figures quietly watch Lee Seahun as he prepares to work, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Seahun stands before the intense heat of the forge, his focus entirely on the task at hand. Unlike the other students, he works from instinct, not blueprints. He begins the forging process, his tools moving with a speed and precision that seems almost unnatural for a student. From the doorway, 2 more people have gathered to watch him work, drawn in by the display of extraordinary talent. Seahun activates his skill. He performs thermal substitution, a complex technique of controlling mana and heat simultaneously, something that should be impossible for someone at his level. Watching from the side, the diminutive Professor Reese Dova breaks into a cold sweat, unable to believe what he's seeing. But Seahun just smirks, completely confident in his abilities that far surpass the knowledge of this era. Among the observers is Yom Song-ha, a top-ranked spearman, who watches Seahun's every move with a sharp, calculating gaze. The sound of pure, concentrated energy echoes through the workshop as the metal takes shape under Seahun's control. Professor Dova turns to Seong-ha, seemingly explaining the incredible feat they are witnessing, his voice full of awe. Suddenly, Seahun's eye glows with a crimson light. He's activating his unique ability, Blacksmith of Bonds, to analyze Seong-ha. Seong-ha is taken aback, realizing that Seahun's gaze seems to see right through him, uncovering his deepest secret. Later, Seong-ha approaches Seahun and admits his crisis. He reveals his struggle to create his signature flame wheels, a problem that threatens his future. With a look of desperation, he confesses that he has hit a wall, unable to progress no matter how hard he tries. The root of his problem is a second, hidden attribute, darkness, conflicting with his family's pure fire techniques. Seahun listens calmly, then tells him that his method of suppressing the dark mana is why none of his attempts are working. The clash between his fire and dark mana creates an unstable explosion of power, making his techniques weak and inefficient. Seong-ha grits his teeth in frustration, having spent years trying and failing to solve this problem on his own. Seahun, however, already knows the answer. The problem isn't the conflicting mana, but the vessel used to control it. With a plan already forming, Seahun suddenly grabs Seong-ha, ready to make a deal. He pats Seong-ha on the chest, confidently telling him he has a solution, but it will come at a price. Tapping into their newly formed bond, Seahun materializes a red resonant black stone, a perfect ore where fire and dark mana coexist in harmony. Seahun leads Seong-ha away to a private training room, explaining that he's going to create the perfect environment to solve his problem. He accesses a control panel, using his regressor knowledge to perfectly replicate the environment of Seong-ha's home. In an instant, the sterile room transforms. A system voice announces their arrival at the virtual Flameflower Gate, perfectly setting the stage for Seahun's lesson. Seahun gestures to the training ground, explaining that the issue isn't Seong-ha's power, but his mindset. He's been trying to be a perfect copy of someone else. He presents the red resonant black stone, telling Seong-ha that this will be the key to harmonizing his two conflicting attributes. Confused, Seong-ha now holds two training spears. Seahun's proposed method is to use two different vessels for his two different powers, something he's never considered before. Seahun instructs him to stop trying to replicate the sixth wheel technique of the Flameflower style, and instead, just focus on his own power. A memory flashes through Seong-ha's mind. His father, a master of the spear, flawlessly executing the very technique he can't master. His father's movements were perfect because he only had one attribute, pure fire. Seong-ha's attempt to copy him was a path to failure from the start. Seahun points out this exact problem, noting that since Seong-ha isn't his father, their paths to mastery must also be different. Seong-ha looks down at his spear, where the black and red energies of his dark and fire attributes are already clashing, proving Seahun's point. Smiling, Seahun encourages him, telling him to stop suppressing his dark attribute and instead let it flow freely through the second spear. A flicker of understanding crosses Seong-ha's face. He grips the spears tightly, a newfound determination in his eyes. He begins to practice, not as a copy, but as himself. He wields both spears at once, allowing his two attributes to finally work in tandem instead of against each other. Seahun watches with a satisfied grin. Everything is going exactly according to his plan. With his unique insight, Seahun can see the flow of energy and muscle movement, allowing him to guide Seong-ha's training with perfect clarity. Seong-ha stops, shocked. For the first time, he feels his power flowing without resistance. The breakthrough is immediate. Seahun strikes a cute pose, cheekily asking if Seong-ha understands now, almost as if he's teasing him for struggling with such a simple problem. His playful demeanor vanishes in an instant, replaced by a sharp gaze. Seong-ha flinches, reminded of just how powerful the first-year student in front of him truly is. With renewed focus, Seong-ha turns back to his training, swinging the two spears with a power and stability he's never felt before. He stares at the grand architecture of his home, now understanding the path he must walk is his own. Now that he's proven he can solve his problem, Seahun begins to lay out his terms for their new partnership. Seahun's first promise is a big one. He will make Seong-ha the next leader of the Flameflower Gate, surpassing even his legendary father, Yom Jin-hyun. The scene briefly flashes back to a younger Seong-ha sitting with his father, looking over the vast domain he was expected to one day lead. Back in the present, a notification confirms their bond has reached level 3. Seahun's influence over Seong-ha is now solidified. all according to his grand design. But Seihun's goals lie far beyond the academy, in dangerous and chaotic realms where even the strongest hunters perish. And so, he names his price. In exchange for securing his future as sect leader, Songha must become his shield when he ventures into the 6 great demon realms to hunt for god-tier materials. Seihun makes a simple gesture, sealing the deal. Songha stares back, his mind reeling as he processes the sheer scale of the pact he is about to enter. Songha's eyes widen in shock. He came looking for a way to fix his technique, but was just offered the key to his future and a role in a battle of unimaginable scale. Seihun explains that a powerful demonic figure is blocking his path to a critical material, and he needs a trustworthy tank to break through. He chose Seongha for this vital role. Songha takes the red resonant black stone from Seihun. Holding the perfectly balanced ore, he accepts the deal without hesitation. His path is now clear. With the pact sealed, Seihun smiles. The first elite piece on his board has been successfully placed, moving him one step closer to his ultimate goal of saving the world. At the Flame Flower Gates training hall, instructor Gang Hyun-un stands with a smug smile, ready to oversee a promotion test he believes will be an easy win. He confidently welcomes his challenger, Yom Song-ha, who is accompanied by the blacksmith Lee Se-hoon. The instructor sees this as nothing more than a chance to put the young master in his place. With a dismissive chuckle, Hyun-un scoffs at the very idea of the challenge, completely underestimating the man standing before him. But Yom Song-ha's gaze is firm and unwavering. He isn't here to play games, he's here to claim his position. The instructor begins to lecture Seongha, his tone condescending as he explains the so-called gap in their abilities. Suddenly, as the duel begins, Hyun-un's smug expression vanishes. He senses a power from Seongha that catches him completely off guard. A dark, monstrous aura begins to emanate from Seongha, a sinister energy that the instructor has never seen before. He can't believe his eyes. Still trying to maintain his authority, Hyun-un warns Seongha that it's too early for him, completely oblivious to the fact that his world is about to be shattered. The instructor stands ready with his long spear, the traditional weapon of their sect. Across from him, Seongha begins to draw the dual weapons Seihun specially crafted for him. In a flash, Seongha unleashes his true power. His twin blades glow with a terrifying red energy, ready to deliver an attack that will overwhelm the arrogant instructor. Yom Seongha, wielding dual spears, launches his attack with fierce determination. Instructor Gang Hyun-un is taken aback. He recognizes the energy coming from Seongha, wondering if it's the dark attribute mana he was explicitly told to suppress. Seongha smirks, his confidence growing as he unleashes his full power. Tendrils of dark, fiery energy swirl around him, a chaotic force that defies the traditional teachings of the Flame Flower Gate. Hyun-un, refusing to be intimidated, counters with his own flame technique, swinging his long spear to meet the incoming assault. The two forces collide in a massive explosion of power, shaking the entire training hall. Hyun-un puts all his strength into his attack, expecting to overpower the younger challenger. But from Seongha's perspective, the instructor's refined flame technique is nothing more than a flickering candle. His dark mana takes the form of a monstrous beast, its raw, untamed power completely overwhelming and devouring the instructor's attack. With a deafening crack, Hyun-un's prized long spear shatters into pieces, unable to withstand the sheer destructive force of Seongha's assault. Defeated and disarmed, the instructor drops to his knees in stunned silence. The battle is over in an instant. Watching from the side, Lee Se-hoon casually picks up his creation, asking if the instructor found them crude. He looks down at the broken remains of the instructor's spear, commenting on what a waste of good materials it was. Seihun then turns to Seongha, reminding him that this is just the beginning. To truly become the sect leader, he'll need the approval of most of the other instructors. But Seongha isn't worried. He declares that with Seihun's weapons, he'll make them all kneel, one by one. Seihun crouches down to examine the shattered spear, remarking that it seems the instructor was given a direct order to deal with Seongha. He explains that the spear was designed to amplify its user's power, but lacked durability, a fatal flaw that made it easy to break. Seongha seems to finally understand, realizing that Seihun's analysis of his abilities and the weapons he created were all part of a larger plan. Seihun simply smirks, telling him he's finally catching on. He then reminds him of their deal in exchange for making him the sect leader. Seongha will follow him to kill the demon gods. With the agreement solidified, Seihun lightly taps Seongha with the spear, telling him to put it away. A notification appears. Seihun's bond level with Yom Song-ha has increased to level 2, strengthening their relationship. The system explains that their relationship is now defined as a transaction, where completing deals generates bond stones. Later, the scene shifts to the Babel Academy's auction house. The refining department is holding its regular auction, and the hall is packed. An energetic auctioneer takes the stage, kicking off the event with enthusiasm and getting the crowd excited. Sitting in the audience, Seahun is flanked by Jake Myers and an elegantly dressed girl. Jake compliments his new style, which Seahun credits to his professor's advice on the importance of appearances. From another part of the hall, two figures watch the proceedings. One, a man with gray hair, notes the unusually high attendance, sensing something is off. His companion agrees, explaining that everyone is here to see the work of the Academy's new valedictorian. It's clear a trap has been set for Lee Seahun. On stage, the main event of the quality verification is revealed, a special cloth called Seo Gyumpo. As a demonstration, a tester strikes a previously submitted sword against the cloth with full force. Instantly, the sword shatters upon impact, its own sharpness turned against it by the magical properties of the cloth. The auctioneer explains that 35 items have already been sold, but this verification process is a new addition, leaving the broken sword on the stage as a warning. The girl next to Seahun asks why they're doing this, and Seahun explains it's a new rule for this auction. All submitted items must undergo a quality check. Seahun watches intently, recognizing the trap. His rivals had clearly prepared this just for him. The girl explains the cloth's origin. It's Seo Gyumpo, woven from the fur of a white tiger, a creature known for its incredibly sharp claws. She continues, explaining that the cloth mimics the sharpness of any blade that touches it, effectively forcing the weapon to cut itself and testing its durability to the absolute limit. Seahun just smiles, intrigued. This was a far more interesting trap than he had expected. With a bang of the gavel, the auctioneer announces the next item, number 36, the White Light Longsword, submitted by Lee Seahun. The tester takes his position, ready to strike Seahun's sword against the Seo Gyumpo cloth and humiliate him in front of the entire academy. He swings the sword down, but instead of the sound of shattering metal, the blade glows with a brilliant white light upon contact. A blinding flash erupts from the stage, sending a shockwave that startles the tester. As the light fades, the sword is revealed, humming with power and completely unharmed. The trap had failed spectacularly.